Hello, everybody. It is 5:30. Please welcome to the Talbot County Board of Education work session meeting. It is Monday, June 9th. And as you can see, we have a quorum present, so we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. If everybody could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, that would be great. Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Excellent. Do I have a motion to approve our work session minutes from May 19th, 2025?
All motion to approve. Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Fantastic. Okay, we're going to start our work session this evening, opening up with our consent agenda items and new business. Dr. Einhorn, correct?
Sorry. So at last month's meeting, I presented to you on first reader, policy 9.23, library and materials selection. Shared with you at that time how the revisions that you see in the policy and the AR came to be through the committee led by our library media specialist, our media specialists as well, and in conjunction with MSDE. The changes are aligned with the Freedom to Read Act, and per MSDE and COMAR, we are required to update our policy to reflect that by July 1 of 2025. There were no public comment provided since the first reader, and happy to take any questions you have at this time.
Anybody? Questions for Dr. Einhorn about library material selection? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Einhorn.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have, there it is, access to the telehealth platform services in secondary schools, which is a new policy, 10.28, brought to us by Ms. Darlene Spurrier, and it will be in second reader.
Yes, so this policy and AR, as President Jackson just said, is new. It's based on House Bill 522, which is a new law that goes into effect July 1. The purpose is really to simply provide access to that platform for students. I know there were some questions during first reader, and so I wrote those down. I went back and looked at the language of the law. To keep it consistent and clear, the policy I would suggest stay as is because it's just general what the state is requiring us to do, and then the consent piece is in the AR because that's how we're choosing as a county to implement this. And then the other issues about HIPAA and multilingual students and translating, we're not required to do any of that. This is real. The law simply requires us to offer the platform for students to access those appointments. So that's why those things were not in the AR.
I am confused. I thought that the law was requiring us to offer the space that allowed the student to access, which is different to me than a platform. A platform is an app or the technology. So as a district, are we responsible for offering them the technology, or are we just responsible for providing a quiet space where they can access this on whatever device they are doing so?
So we are responsible for offering them access to a telehealth platform, which means that we need to provide them with a space. And then, as I had mentioned before, we've decided as a county that we're going to use our Talbot County Public Schools issued devices to keep security tight from a technology standpoint. So we are providing a device. Now, in the event that a physician or a care provider is using some kind of platform that we don't have ability to access on a device, Mr. Wilson will provide he'll get that prepared and have it ready for a student to use. And we'll be discussing that with the care provider as needed, which is why we need that 10-day advance notice and permission to talk to care providers so that we can make sure we have that. So to answer your question, it's the platform, the telehealth platform and the space.
So will there be one single device that is sort of shared from student to student as they come in and access it, or is all of these apps and various telehealth platforms going to be installed on each student's device?
So it will be each student's device. That would be our first go-to. In the event that the student can't access whatever the care provider is going to use, then we would go to a loaner, if you will, from technology. But the idea is that each student would use their own device if possible.
Is the school nurse responsible for anything with this at all?
No, and I did go back and just reread it a couple of times because I wanted to make sure we're not responsible for any of the provisions under HIPAA other than to provide a space that is conducive to privacy to the best of our ability. And we're not responsible for, implementing the appointment or, any of those things. It's really to provide the space and the access to the online platform.
Basically, a child will bring a note to school, gives to their teacher, says, I need to have at 1:15 for my platform follow-up appointment. Something along those lines?
The parent has to apply 10 days in advance for the appointment because we need time to make sure that their device can handle whatever the care provider is going to use to execute that appointment with the student.
And what happens when they don't remember those 10 days? How are we going to handle that?
Well, we're going to push it out as much as possible, and an exception to that can be made. We put a provision in the AR that an exception to the 10 days can be made at the discretion of a principal if there are extenuating circumstances, but we are going to need some lead time to make sure we're prepared and able to provide that service.
Opening ourselves up to any trouble should a child not do those 10 days and then it suddenly becomes our fault because we didn't do X, Y, and Z? Is there any foresight in that?
I mean, I don't, what the law says is we have to provide access to students. It gives us the leeway to require the parent to be there or not, to use our device or let them. So there's some freedom in how we do this. And when we drafted this, as I think I had mentioned before, I looked at several other counties. We talked to some people from the state. We tried to make this as small a burden on our system, being the nurses, our folks from Chop Tank. We didn't want this to be a burden on anybody else. And so I don't know that it's an issue of being in trouble. We would just work with that parent to get things in place for maybe the next appointment. If that was the case and they just came in and said, oh, I have an appointment at 1:30, we wouldn't be able to accommodate that.
To me, this seems like one of those areas that they're requiring that we have policy, and the policy complicates the whole issue far more than the issue will actually be or has been or will be in practice. It's the very little pieces of the policy that we're putting together that just seem to overcomplicate this scenario. And we're asking reasonable questions given the policy that is had in front of us. The more we sort of unpack this, the more I think, well, this just makes it so much more confusing and complicated when it in fact is not or doesn't need to be, which is rather neither here nor there and has nothing to do with you or the policy itself. It's just sort of a statement. It's one more thing that we're required to do that makes it far more complicated to do school at all.
I agree with you totally. What we've tried to do in the AR that I think is maybe appearing to make it complicated is we've tried to close as many loopholes as we could so that our staff isn't burdened by this mandate.
Ms. Berry, I just have a question. Do you know if the state is going to require any kind of reporting structure once this is in place? Like, are they going to want stats on the numbers and things? Have they talked about that?
They have not, and that's not in the law, but we are going to maintain records and we'll collect them in student services at the end of every year so that we could produce data if the state comes 3 months after the fact saying, we want the data for
Yeah,
last
because
year.
I could see that coming next
Yeah.
possibly. All right, thanks.
I think I read in the AR that there was going to be maybe a log or a book or some type of information where the student comes in with a note to say, this is my appointment day, I'm requesting an appointment. But the AR doesn't specify to say, you might haven't figured this out, who that goes to, because I just want to make sure that that information stays confidential if it's not going to be in the student nurse's office. So has there been any thought to that so we can be sure student helpers, other teachers, things like that, where that information is not privy, that stays confidential with the student?
So the applications go to the administrator, and I know the functioning of the schools, they might have other eyes on that. And that's one of the things we'll be talking to principals about this summer when we brief them on this update and the requirements that are going to be in place. And we'll talk about, please make sure that you have an avenue by which this can be in a sealed envelope or however each building decides to handle that, but that will be discussed, yeah.
Great, and hopefully you guys were listening when I had made a recommendation if we could provide a space that is away from other classrooms, things like that, so we could provide as much privacy as possible.
Absolutely, yeah. And when possible, we're going to try and use the health centers. If that's not possible, then we're going to look for other spaces in the building, but that may be a reason that we deny access to the platform, because it's better to deny it than force it to be somewhere where it can't be private.
And another thing that I saw in practice that it may not be the school providing it, I'm not sure, but headsets, double headsets for, the student and the parent may also optimize some of that privacy.
And that's a good point, and we can talk about that with the schools and make those available, because I don't know that they're available to every student right now, but I'll talk with Mr. Wilson about that.
More questions for Mrs. Spurrier? Okay, thank you very much. Next topic on the agenda is the Facilities Master Plan with Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you, President Jackson. Good evening, everyone. So I do come before the board this evening to present the 2025 Educational Facilities Master Plan. So to begin, I would like to first thank Dr. David Lieber with Educational Facilities Planning and his staff for providing consultation services that allowed for the completion of this document. And the Facilities Master Plan is a long-term planning document that TCPS must submit annually to the IAC with an intended purpose of properly identifying and prioritizing capital improvements that are required to maintain effective and efficient educational facilities. Oops, I apologize. So I'm going to try to be very brief and move through this quickly because I know it is a long document. But the document is divided into 5 main sections, and the first section is the goal, standards, policies, and guidelines section. This section is broad in scope and includes information on the Talbot County Public Schools strategic plan, grade organization, staffing ratios, and also generally describes attendance areas, facility-related board policies and actions. Also included is an overview of the educational programs, student transportation, and the community use of our facilities. The community analysis section considers Talbot County's comprehensive plan, reviews changes in population, and analyzes this information to make determinations that result in the best use of public school facilities. The Talbot County Planning Office has reviewed the document and has provided a consistency letter demonstrating support for the associated EFMP information. The inventory and evaluation of our facilities section includes information relevant to the current condition of our facilities, which is utilized by the Public School Construction Program to maintain a statewide facilities database. And section 4 focuses on school enrollment data and is meant to analyze, track, and ultimately recognize student enrollment trends, which will be used to support efficient facility utilization. The Maryland Department of Planning has reviewed our enrollment and projections and supports the projections included in the Facilities Master Plan. This slide is an excerpt from the approval letter that shows our current enrollment projections, which are within the required 5% of the state's projections.
Do these projections include all of the new developments that are going in? Because there's
So-
several going in.
Yeah, they do not. They do. We have started to fold in some of the lakeside development because it is in build-out phase. But as I've said in years past, and I know it is a little frustrating, but you know, the state, Maryland Department of Planning, the IAC, they really like to see demonstrated enrollment increases before incorporating large residential planned development that's not actually being built out. And all the projects currently slated are, excuse me, are market driven. So they are built out as the units are sold. So it does make for a you know, a little bit of a challenge for predicting. And the other thing we really need to be looking at is what is the target market for these residential developments. And the truth is that a lot of these are not necessarily going to cater to our families or to families. So, but I understand the question though, Ms. Dodson.
Along with that question, sorry to slow you down, how much impact have we seen from the lakeside development? It doesn't, in looking at our enrollment, it doesn't seem like it's had a significant impact kind of either way.
So, so first off on Lakeside, right now, there's about 375 platted sites approved. So of those 375, I believe there's about 145 that are in some level of approval or in some level of build out, meaning sale or currently being built or already built. And from, excuse me, geez, from those 145, we've seen 18 students. So if you do the math roughly, you know, for the complete project, 2,500 homes, if that were to remain consistent, and this is just obviously a rough estimate, we'd be looking at around 300, 350 kids. So now, phase 1 and 2 are approved and are currently being sold and built out. Phase 3, 4, and 5 still have to go through some level of approval at the county because of the wastewater situation. So, you know, those are very much in question. So you're right, Ms. Jackson. I don't think we've seen a huge influx from those homes that have been sold or are being built out.
And so just from my experience and coming from another state, how Maryland operates is that they don't project with the information that they're seeing of the build out. They want them actually there.
Yeah, Dr. Pepicai, I mean, so that's a good summary, yes. That's really where we're at. And so, you know, there just hasn't been some demonstrated effect from these residential developments. So I am going to move on to school enrollment data. So this kind of speaks to what we're talking about here. And this is my own chart, not from the document itself, but it just shows you what our elementary, middle, and high school enrollment you know, kind of trend looks like. And it's been obviously relatively flat, and we're expected to see it stay relatively flat through 2034. The facility needs analysis is the final section of the document and is meant to provide an important measure as to the efficiency of our school system from a facility utilization perspective. And this slide displays a table from the section that summarizes our current and projected facility utilization percentages. Wow, I'm having a hard time. With the current enrollment projections, TCPS remains in a relatively comfortable position related to our overall utilization across facilities. And so just left to right, you can see, well, obviously top to bottom, you got the different schools, the state rated capacity, what the capacity is of each of the buildings, and then you can see the actual enrollment from September 30, 2024 for each of the schools, percentage utilization based on the state rated capacity, and then projected out to 2029 and 2034. And it is almost perfectly flat, so.
Could I make a request that we publicize this slide? Maybe we can get it posted on Facebook or share it in some way, because I think that the community often has questions about which schools are at capacity or start saying, oh, such and such is over capacity, and nobody here or there is arguing that our schools feel crowded and that as kids get bigger, the hallways feel smaller. But according to the state-rated capacity, we don't have any schools that the state would pay to expand or would say are in crisis. I think it's important to see those numbers in black and white.
Yes, yes, and yes. And relatively very comfortable. Easton High School right now is currently has the highest utilization percentage, and it is pushing it. But the state, and I think I've shared this with the board before, the state, they really like to see as close to 100% utilization as possible, even though that does create, a crowded school, but that is the intent. So there are a couple topics that generate uncertainty related to long-range planning, for the county. The most concerning for school facilities is the uncertainty surrounding the impact of the planned residential housing developments, which we will continue to monitor. That is what this document is partly meant to do. And also the uncertainty surrounding pre-kindergarten expansion associated with the Maryland Blueprint, specifically enrollment surrounding the P3 program. And so just to be clear, so actions for consideration, I have adjustment of attendance areas and school consolidation. And the consultant, Dr. Lieber, who is the former director for the public school construction program, so he speaks with great authority on this stuff, we had many discussions, and I know it's come up in the past, and I'm not advocating, nor is he, but it is something for the board to keep an eye on. Redistricting, as these developments are built out, if there is a need, we need to really be thinking about what makes the most sense from a districting perspective, and also the Tillman issue, the making sure that we're continuing to remain current, in our opinion, on what that school is costing and, what the enrollment is like and what it is like without the open enrollment option. So once again, no recommendations here, just important for any school that's fluctuating around 60% utilization that you as a board, continue to keep an eye on it, basically, is all we're saying. So, and then last but not least, the pre-K enrollment, we are in a great position, so kudos to us, I guess, on the 4-year-old pre-K program. We're well ahead of many other counties. 3-year-old pre-K, P3, it sounds like the state is really kind of looking for a private intervention, private model there. So right now, it doesn't look like that's going to fall to us. But we did continue to draw attention to it because it is something, if that changes, we obviously would have a capacity issue if we started having large numbers of 3-year-olds coming in. So just want to keep that on the radar. And that is it for the facilities master plan. Obviously, it's a consent agenda item, so I would ask for formal approval at the board meeting on Wednesday, but I can certainly answer any questions if there are any others.
Questions for Mr. Schaefer?
Is the high school the next one on the list to be rebuilt after, I know we're in the middle of Chapel, and that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to immediately start building another school, but is the high school the next one on the list, considering that it is approaching capacity?
Yes, it would. So technically, White Marsh and Easton High School were basically renovated at the same time. But from a condition standpoint, Easton High School would be the priority, and because of its age, it would be next. But we are looking at, probably 5 to 7 years before even starting that planning process. It's going to obviously be a very large project and a very expensive project. So it's something we're going to have lots of discussions with the council about as we get closer.
Built or renovated?
Well, that would be part of the decision-making process. There would be a feasibility study done that would look at whether the building is in a state that it could be renovated, or we need to look at an Easton Elementary model where we replace it.
sorry to take this off on a tangent, but what happens with the feasibility study is that you work with a consulting group or an architectural firm, and they sort of talk through both options with you, with the group that is part of the study, and then it will present costing for each option to meet the best need, and then the board will consider both options to rebuild or to renovate, and the board will pick one that they will then present to the county council, and then the county council will have to agree on that, and then all of that has to go to the state, and the state has to agree on that as well. And for history, background purposes, when we went through this with Chapel, the board approved the plan to rebuild completely because from a cost perspective, it wasn't that much more. The county council agreed, and then the state kicked it back and said, actually, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to renovate. So a lot of work goes into it for the state just to make the final decision and sort of based on whatever formulas they're working on the day. But it's a fascinating sort of process. And should anybody be here when we start that with Easton High School, I would definitely recommend getting on that committee because it's there's a lot of insight to be learned from how you go about building a new school and what goes into it, and definitely very interesting.
Do we own enough land at Easton High School that we could make another building or add on to it?
So it's a good question. And honestly, I don't know the answer. That is something that we would have to evaluate. It would be very difficult. We definitely would not be able to have athletics at the site if we were to build, it's kind of like Easton Elementary and build adjacent to the existing building. So that's something we'd have to look at, and the architect would help us figure that out.
This is probably premature, but would it include the auditorium?
I think, yes, I think we would, times have changed since Easton High School was last renovated, and just like St. Michael's, a case would have to be made for an auditorium, but it's definitely in the ed specs now, with all that happens in a high school, theater arts and that kind of thing. It would be a benefit to us to advocate for that.
More questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you.
Next on the list is, wait, I'm skipping ahead. Special education report with Ms. Menches and Mrs. DeVerick, Dr. DeVerick.
I believe this is on, correct? All right, good evening. President Jackson and members of the board, I come before you this evening to present the FY26 Special Education Staffing Plan. It's going to be presented a little differently than it has been in prior years, so hopefully this helps shed some light on areas that have been a concern in previous years. So we have three key areas of focus in special education. One is to narrow the gap of achievement between students with disabilities and their grade level peers. The second is to provide special education instruction and services inside the general education setting for the majority of students, especially right now for students in elementary grades. And the third is to follow special education policies and procedures in the development of IEPs and other documents. So for our first area of focus, as I previously stated, it is to narrow the gap of achievement between students with disabilities and their grade level peers. And I'm going to provide a little bit of data as to why this has been an area of focus, which probably this will not come as any shock. But we have a fairly large gap between students without disabilities and students with disabilities in terms of the proficiency rate when you look at state assessment data. So this, I think the bar graph shows it a little bit better. So when you look at third graders all the way through 10th graders, you can see that those without disabilities and those with disabilities, there's a fairly large gap between those without disabilities and those with disabilities. While we are making improvements in the world of special education, especially 10th graders and in the elementary years, we are still seeing a huge gap, and you can see the
elementary grades, especially in the area of math, which I'll show you next. So it's even more prevalent in the area of math. We are definitely making improvements at the elementary levels in an algebra, but there is still a fairly large gap. The second area of focus is providing special education instruction and services inside the general education setting. And the reason we want to do that is so that they can have access to the curriculum. The current data, with the exception of this year, and I think we are going to see as soon as the data is released that we've done better this year, but you can see that for 3 years in a row, we were starting to do a little bit worse year after year. So we wanted to focus on this area, as I said, so that we could have students inside the general education setting because that's where they get access to the curriculum. And then we've partnered with MCIE, which is Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education, to help us work towards getting students more included in the general education setting, even our students with more significant cognitive disabilities. And I'm going to bring up my entourage to let you hear some more about that. And I'm actually going to back out.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's do a little dance here.
I like being the entourage. My name is Julia Smith. I'm Supervisor of Special Education, and I will give you the highlights for the district implementation team as part of our partnership with Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education. It is a multidisciplinary team, and so the idea is having district-level leadership. We have Dr. Pepakai, Dr. Einhorn, Ms. Spurrier, Ms. Menches, and we have several of our curriculum supervisors, most notably our ELA Early Childhood, ELA Elementary, and our Math Elementary, and that's because, as Ms. mentioned, we're really focusing on the elementary grades at this time because Easton Elementary has been the first school that we have gone into with this new programming. So that said, being a multidisciplinary team, we meet monthly. Same as the school team, it's a parallel process, and the role of the district team is really to dialogue and discuss district perspectives and programs and policies so that we are aligned and supporting what is happening at the school level. So, for example, some of our first meetings were a lot of discussion around mindsets. And, what is our common understanding of inclusive practices? And so that really helped us craft a common vision. And then we collaboratively developed a framework for the county. It's a 5-year time frame. I think that the board has already seen that document, but it is done with, again, true collaboration to make sure that everything that we are planning for, discussing, and doing at the district level, whether it is, new ways of thinking about how we are supporting schools with master scheduling, how we are looking at the needs in terms of professional learning, not only for special education teachers, but for our general education teachers, and staffing plans, because we really are also looking a lot and working with MCIE in how to most effectively and efficiently use our current staffing and then where we might need to add additional staff in order to support the students, being more time included in the general education classroom. And so I'm going to turn it over to the school team, but also to kind of put it in the context is the overarching goal of MCIE is that we want to create authentic school communities where every student belongs. And so some of the big ideas that we talk a lot about are presumed competence and rightful presence for all of our learners. Okay? Yeah. All right. Here.
Squeeze past. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lisa DeVerick, principal at Easton Elementary School. And at the start of this school year, we engaged with MCIE in September. As Julia said, the meetings run pretty smoothly. They meet with the district team first, and then they come to the school, and we have our school-based team that they meet with, which consists of administration, school counselors, general education teachers, coaches, and special educators. They also took time to get to know our school and our student body, so they visited classrooms for very informal observations to get to know the staff and the students. The meetings took place in the afternoons. They began with a shared understanding, which, in my opinion, was so moving and really changed my belief system. I mean, I was always thought we were doing inclusion, but they really opened my mind to what inclusion really should be. There were reflection questions so that we got to dive deeply into what they were presenting to us. They asked us to target some grade levels for the following school year to move forward with this inclusive practice. So Easton Elementary did target kindergarten and third grade. So those will be the 2 grade levels that we'll be focusing on for next school year. And I'm going to let my colleague, Mr. Haynes, talk a little bit about learner planning and what that looks like at the granular level. But MCI was terrific. It's the whole package. They came and met with our staff in whole staff meetings. They did a DOTS activity, a belief survey, so they genuinely understood where our staff stood on inclusive practices, so they had an idea of where to begin and what they needed to do to educate staff. They attended our professional learning meetings at our various grade levels to assure teachers and to explain the process further. They did a terrific job with our team on natural proportion scheduling. So that is getting students who would typically be excluded for the majority of their day in self-contained classrooms, and getting them out into the general education. And they, as Julia said, their belief is every student is a general education student first. And so we are standing behind that. They have helped also, once we had the scheduling finished, they helped us, they came back and helped us build the individual teacher schedules. And so we started with our kindergarten, and we just looked at class 1, and this is what we built their day, and class 2 in kindergarten, and we built their day. So it is a very strategic process. They have also supported their work with a plethora of resources that they have shared with us, to include a large body of research that supports this work. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Haynes.
Hey, good evening. So my name is Kyle Haynes. I'm a special ed teacher over at Easton Elementary School, and one of the facilitators of a lot of our inclusive practices as we continue with this work. And the main thing that we've looked at the second half of this school year with MCIE have been what we call learner plans. They're different than an IEP or any of the other pieces that we've used in special education. They are a supplemental document that is basically a detailed, targeted plan to promote and support those students in general education. So it really looks at students with complex support needs. It looks at their schedule in a level of detail that we haven't looked at before, from arrival all the way to dismissal, with every single segment of their day included. And we're looking at how to utilize different staff, different supports throughout that school day. And the main thing that we've come up with is breaking down that school day and the expectations for a student without complex support needs, so a typically developed peer in that class, what the expectations for them are in that space, what the expectations are for that student that might have complex support needs in that space for that specific subject, for that specific task, and then also the different supports that we will need to put in place so that they can achieve those expectations. One big piece that has come forward has been looking at things like collaborative groups. How are we going to get students that utilize AAC devices or different visual ways to communicate. How can we get them engaged in collaborative discussions? And it's led to some great ideas and some new things to try that has been very helpful for those students in finding new ways to participate and engage with general education curriculum that they were not typically able to before. The last step of the learner plans has been the action steps, and that has been a big process, especially moving forward, looking at the next school year. In that action plan, it has included a list of different tasks, jobs, things that need to be made by different staff, and different things to try, new strategies to promote, so that student, if they are not able to participate in a certain activity or a certain piece of their general education school day, finding new ways to get them to work towards participating in that. So it is a long process. It is a very long document, but it has been much more detailed. We've been able to drill down in a way that we have not been able to do before with specific students that would typically be included in less of that school day and not participating in a lot of general education curriculum. So that has been very beneficial. Yeah, it's been great. That's all I got.
And our third focus area is following special education policies and procedures in the development of IEPs and other documents. And we do this through several ways. Our monitorings, we had a comprehensive monitoring. We have a medical assistance audit each year, internal record reviews, and through observations, both formal and informal. How does this all work together? So we start with, well, let me get to my, collaboration, which leads to data, which connects to observations and monitorings to determine our focus areas. And then our focus areas determine where our fiscal resources should be spent, which ultimately lead to staffing, which is our most important fiscal resource. So I spent a lot of time at the beginning talking about our focus areas because I think it's important for it to connect to why the staffing recommendations are the staffing recommendations. So the first staffing recommendation is to continue our inclusive efforts at Easton Elementary School with MCIE by adding 4 instructional assistants to that building so we can support those students through those learner planning plans that Mr. Haynes was just talking about. Staffing recommendation number 2 is to add 1 special education teacher to Easton Middle School so that the interventions can primarily be provided by a special education teacher rather than instructional assistants, which is predominantly the way we've been providing them. And the goal here is in the hopes that we can help narrow that gap that you can see very largely and evident in the data at the middle school level. The third recommendation is to shift 1 special education teacher from Easton High School to Chapel District Elementary School due to a recent, I would say in the last quarter, rising numbers in special education students at that school. And that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions?
Of course there are. You mentioned kids in kindergarten and 3rd grade, or was that what was rolled out this year? Or is that what's being rolled out next year?
That's what the school, so there's a district team and there's a school-based team. The school-based team at Easton Elementary, those were what the school determined would be rolled out for next year at that building.
And what about the kids that aren't in kindergarten or 3rd grade?
So they each year are gonna talk and determine, they've already had some grades that they've already
been working on. And Dr. Barrett can probably tell you what those grades are. I don't have those grades off the top of my head, but they've already been implementing it for some of the grades in that building. And so they're going to continue with the grades that they've been implementing, and they're going to keep working on infusing it through all the grades at that school until they've hit all grades. And then one of your slides mentions inside general education and inside regular education. The same thing. Okay. We use them interchangeably. Usually we say general education, but. Because I noticed both on the same slide, and I wondered why the different figures there when it's basically the same term. And then I guess I also wanted to know about the kids that are currently in self-contained classrooms. Is the goal to get some of those children back into gen ed? Obviously, every situation is different when you're talking about special education, so I realize that might not be feasible for all children. But I didn't know if that was ultimately the goal, to try to do more of that. Yes, and we've already started to do some of that at Easton Elementary. And if you look at the district plan, MCIE will also be working with St. Michael's Elementary next year as well. So when we say inclusion, we mean inclusion for all. So even students with more significant cognitive disabilities inside, we say self-contained, or in more classrooms that are excluded, even those students, the goal is to get them included as much as possible. And obviously that's through the IEP process, so it will be IEP teams meeting and determining what is most appropriate for those students. So basically you're improving the least restrictive environment. Correct. And then something you also mentioned earlier was about general education, because that the students then have greater access to the curriculum. But I also want to emphasize the importance of peer modeling, which I realize I'm probably preaching to the choir, but peer modeling is vitally important for these children. Correct. Yes.
Can I add to that? And this is a personal story, and I don't know that we often sit up here and share our why we throw down so hard for certain things. And I generally sit up here and throw down really hard for special ed every year. And it occurred to me this year that it might be helpful to explain my why. And that is related to peer modeling. So I grew up in Vermont, where they've been a pioneer in special education since I was young, and that was a long time ago. But in my classroom, when I was in first grade and second grade, was a young man named Ben, and Ben had cerebral palsy, and he was in my classroom full-time for my entire year, both years. And he was the kindest, smartest, most emotionally intelligent, little boy at the time, and just taught me personally so much in my life, and just had such an impact on me. And if you know me, my third child's name is Ben, after this young man. He had that large of an impact on me in my life. And so to me, that was the model of special ed. That was how it should be. That's how kids should grow up. When you talk about peer modeling, he modeled to me so much that I needed to know in my life. And so when I push hard, it's because every child should have access to peers like that and to learning like that. And so that's my why, and that's just no question, I'm just sharing. I do have a question though, and this is for Dr. Pepkai. In beginning of the school year 23, so we're reaching in the Wayback Machine here, we as a board had said, could we please establish a committee to look at special education, knowing that as a board, our scope is narrow and there's not much that we can do to support what we're trying to do in special ed. However, we can support you from a budgetary perspective. So can we take a deep dive with a committee looking into what we need to do to revolutionize special ed in this district? How can we fund it? What do we need to do to fund it? How can we tell our story to county council? And we had sort of said, hey, can we please take the school year to dig in hard about what that would look like? And at the time, we kind of bounced back and forth a little bit. And then eventually you said, well, let's wait for this data because this group is coming in and we're going to have this data. So my question, roundabout-ish, is now we have the data, we waited, can we please address this from a budgetary perspective? Because it does sound like it is going to be a lift to get to where we need to be.
Well, I think we started with those 9 positions that we asked going to the county council that they're funding, because some of those are special ed staffing. So that's the first thing, and I think we're going to continue. I mean, kudos to Ms. Menges and the team that found, MCIE, because I've been a part of these meetings, And what they are, their mantra is all means all. And I think what you've seen here is a model now. And we would have to be naive to think that there aren't bumps in the road, because I know at a staff as big as Easton Elementary, it probably came with some reservations if you're dealing with teachers that are used to, having, additional support, and doing things a certain way for a long time. And this is a change in thinking. And when I just heard Mr. Haynes talking about the learning plans and going detailed all the way down to the schedule, that is a heavy lift. But I think it's a necessary lift for what we're doing. So yes, so my goal will be to continue to have our district team, not only an Easton Elementary team, but a broad team of families and people, so that where it's coming, we already have some understanding of what's coming that's going to be across the district, and tie those to the budget. Because you're right, I think it's going to have a financial impact on what we do.
Well, and I know the MCIE Inclusive Practices plan that we provided, which is in draft, but it's sort of in draft because we constantly are adding things and implementing new things within it. One, any added information you want us to take a look at including in it, by all means, we are an open team and we would love feedback. But also, this is also a part of our strategic plan, so our countywide strategic plan. So we are always looking to make sure that special education and what we're doing is a huge part of our countywide efforts and plan.
And I would say that the things that are being discussed within this plan are not just for special education staff. It's for all staff, because it's just good teaching practices of what we do with inclusive education.
So, my personal experience with IEPs was not good about 4-ish years ago. And we couldn't get an IEP for my child. Now, all of a sudden, they're kind of, I don't want to say prolific, but much more popular, whatever word you want to call. So I'm curious, is this more blueprint driven, or are we finally starting to see more of a student need that we can honestly recognize that they have different learning styles that we're addressing?
Well, what I can say is I've been the director of special ed now in this county for 15 years, going on year 16, and we've been at about the same rate in terms of percentage rate compared to students, the general population of students. So I wouldn't say we're necessarily any different in terms of rate in the county. We have the same eligibility criteria, so it may seem as though we're, I don't want to say giving them out more, but we're really not. The eligibility criteria remains pretty consistent in terms of what it has been for many years now.
I'm not criticizing, I'm grateful for it, but I am just curious. So, you did mention also something about coaches. So are these hired within, and our coaches that we're hiring, they're part of our budget, or are these outside coaches, volunteers? Can you explain more on that?
Are you asking about the instructional assistants?
Well, I'm not sure. I heard somebody mention something about coaches.
I think it was me. It was, they're a part of our school-based team, so that they offer a perspective that's unique to their position from our school-based team. So it's two administrators, special educators, a school counselor. So it's representing the various positions that we have at the elementary school.
I was curious if they were like volunteers or with another organization.
The staff member that's on our school-based team is a math coach, so that she can be looking at these practices and have input when we're doing the learner planning to say, this is where we could insert that.
I think my question or comment is probably more directed to Mr. Haynes. I think the learner plans are very, very great. Now, when you get to the scheduling and when you get down to the end where there might be challenges, and I think that's a good part where the board committee, once implemented, it would be great to be able to have that discussion on themes of what the challenges are. So when we're coming up and talking about budget, we can see if what we've implemented with the recommendations, if they are at all working, if we need to do something different, if we need to shift. But it would be great if the board can receive some type of feedback on how that's working, and I think that will provide the data.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I've been keeping a log. We've done about 15 learner plans so far. They take a couple hours each to really dig down to that level of detail. And I've been keeping track of the common themes that have come up. So yeah, I would be happy to share that with Ms. Mitchell and Ms. Smith as well. Because yeah, it's been an interesting process, especially having the gen ed teacher in there and the special ed teacher in there as well. So we're seeing some common things come up. Of there are some special ed concerns. There are also some general ed concerns. We find ways to support both teachers in that case, or the instructional assistants as well. And then the question at the end of the conversation with the learner plan, if we do find a unique challenge, is always, if not now, then when. So the conversation has really shifted from, okay, they can't participate in this, to they need support in participating in this. How will we do that? If we can't do that right now, then what do we need? And I'll share that with Ms. Mitchell and Ms. Smith as well, if there's some common things coming up that we have to do.
Thank you. That's great, because our students are having more and more complex needs where we could, figure out some ways that we could help on a district level, but also on the board level. If we know what that looks like in practice, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
It sounds like this committee that we would like almost exists already in what's happening at the school. And so I'm wondering if we could broaden it a little bit and maybe add a board member so that the board member could report out in their committee report so that we could get regular updates as to what's happening in the special ed committee and in special ed in general. Is that something, can we push that forward? Okay. More questions?
One more question. So how does this impact students who are more advanced? I'd never heard of peer modeling. I like that, but how do you do that without the other students getting bored?
So typically with peer modeling, feel free to check it. But typically with the peer modeling and with the learner plans, what we find is that you can do learner plans. You can also make specific, you can find specific supports for enrichment as well as intervention. That's been the big piece, has been that if there is a student that requires more peer modeling and support from a peer, we're also going to find ways to enrich that other peer as well. So it's a double-sided piece of, there's the intervention side of things with special ed, and then there's also the enrichment side. It doesn't typically go through special ed directly. However, there is that flip side in that learner plan that we look at as well.
And I'd like to add to that, that's why the next piece and our next big chunk with MCIE is going to be on co-planning. So we provide the time, but they are the experts in, let us show you how to do this like that, so that your time is being used efficiently and effectively, so that every child is getting a plan, so that, if Mr. Haynes and I are planning together, we're using our time most efficiently to reach all learners. So that is the next big piece.
And I'd like to add one more thing. I think there's more to enrichment than just academics, and which you obtain academically from the classroom. Because I think you do, by the fact that there are a diverse array of learners in a classroom, you are enriched by being, as you shared a little bit ago, the learner gains way more than just that academic-based instruction, and can give because they're in the classroom with a diverse group of students.
I have a question. So what would this look like? Is this in elementary through high school? And that's one. I mean, is it going to go all the way through? And these daily learner plans, I'm envisioning every kid has a daily learner plan, or no? Because that's exorbitant.
Significant needs, so we take a look at what does this child need to come into the school? Do they need an adult? Do they just need to make sure they can, once they learn the routine, then they're fine? We just looked at every aspect of the day for these students with significant needs. And then to your first question, I think Mrs. Mitch has provided a 5-year plan for the county. So it is started with Easton Elementary, but next year it's St. Michael's campus, and I'll wait patiently at the high school in year 3. So it is a slow rollout because it is a shift in the mindset for our county, and it's a shift in the right direction. And they're very careful and strategic about it because we have to get it right.
And there is quite a bit of professional development that goes along with this as well. So it's not just, they spent a couple of minutes sharing what they, went through this year, but there was a lot of professional development. There were a lot of meetings. There were a lot of other things that went with this, other than just creating some learner plans and sitting in some meetings. So next year, St. Michael's Elementary School, then we're going to add the other outlying elementary schools, and then we're going to add the secondary schools after that.
So what does this look like in the classroom exactly? It's because I know it was push-in, correct? But then you also had people, the classrooms, it was just special ed, like more of the self-contained. Or then on our visits, we saw 4 kids in one class. So would they all be in gen ed?
Not necessarily. So this is really just making sure that students can be in the general education setting as much as possible. So there will still be a full continuum of services, but for students that can be in the general education setting, it will be giving them the supports, and what those supports are going to be developed through learner plans if it needs to be, so that a team of people, and the team can be a general education teacher, a special education teacher, it may be an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, can sit on that team and determine what those supports need to be and look like. And then that team can help deliver the message to me of, look, this is what it's going to take, this is what the staffing's going to need to be in order for this group of students to be in general education more, which is why we came to you and said we need 4 more instructional assistants. Well, we asked for several last year too.
I think we did see a really good example of this, and I'm happy to call her out by name. When we were in Miss Asmussen's class, in the math class, that was a co-taught class, and there was a cohort of special education students in there, and to me, it just looked like math, and that everybody was engaging, and the co-teacher was doing a good job of checking in on everybody while Miss Asmussen was teaching, but it was just class. It was just math to me, middle school math, which is probably looks like that anywhere you go, and everybody was engaged in their own way. And so I think that there are classrooms where we're doing this really well, and practices that we could replicate in other places. But, shout out to that class. I thought it was great.
With that in mind, are we providing these teachers who have all these extra IEPs the time to be able to do what they need to do? And I know that from experience because my husband has quite a few this year.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why over the last probably 5 years, we've been really looking at making sure that caseloads are manageable, and if specific teachers need additional co-planning time and they don't have common planning time, we've been really diligent about making sure that they can get some common planning time. So yes.
One more question. Are we doing away with self-contained altogether, or we still have that? classroom.
We will always probably still have self-contained.
More special ed questions? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Menchez and the team. Always appreciate hearing from you. This was a great presentation, and a personal thank you for giving us the hours per school. Appreciate that a lot. Next up, we have Mrs. Jones is going to bring us our FY25 budget categorical transfer requests.
Good evening. So, as I mentioned to you at last month's meeting, things kind of happened almost a little out of order. Tomorrow night, there is a county council meeting at which I will be requesting certain category transfers. And in order to make that happen, they request their slides and the request about a week in advance. So I sent that to them last week. You were provided a copy on Wednesday and then hopefully an updated copy on Friday because our request did change a little bit as we finalized and fine-tuned some numbers. So I'm going to get into these requests just a little bit more. And basically, the premise behind this is we are authorized to spend a certain amount of money, and it's broken down by category. So to the extent that we may have some savings in one of our budgetary categories, such as instructional salaries, that we'd like to use in a different category, this board needs to approve any changes to how our existing FY25 budget is organized, and then we need to take those to the county council and get their approval as well. So this is step one, making them aware that we have some changes. Before we get into the expenditure changes, I want to bring to your attention, and I think I mentioned this at a previous board meeting in my financial update, we have one revenue category that we do predict coming in under budget. It's not problematic. The area is we receive reimbursement for non-public tuition. So there's a student whose needs we can't meet, special education students whose needs we can't meet in Talbot County Public Schools. We find the right placement for that student in a private institution of education, and we send them there. Then there's a formula by which we are reimbursed a portion of that education cost. It does not begin to cover all of the cost, and so we did have savings in that category. We just didn't have the utilization we thought we might. So we have savings on the expense side, and therefore there's a shortfall in the revenue too. So what you see here is this is our projection through the end of the year of where we would be with our current budget as is. So in this column on the far left, this is our current FY25 budget. This is what we've actually spent. This includes things that we have encumbered on purchase orders, things we would like to spend in the next few weeks, and our best guess of bills that'll be coming in the next few weeks as we settle out 2025. So obligations and cash expenditures are in this column. So this is what we think we're going to spend by category through the end of the year. And you can see in certain categories, if we did what we were intending, we would be overspent, such as in other instructional cost, all the ones with brackets around it, operation of plant, maintenance of plant, and fixed charges. And we're going to talk through some of that when we get to our FY26 budget discussion, because the majority of the overspending, if you will, is really us prepaying and paying some things early, buying some things early related to FY26. So these are the transfers. These correlate to the areas where we have savings and where we would like to overspend. We had savings in instructional salaries due to vacancies. We also had savings a little bit in materials of instruction. Part of that, the biggest piece in there, there's lots of little things that go into that number, but our dual enrollment textbooks came in under budget, what we had set for ourselves. And that makes sense because, this was our second full year of dual enrollment, and we were trying to make sure we had enough budgeted, but didn't have a good track record of what those costs were going to be. Then we would like to use some of those savings in other instructional cost, and primarily that would be, we would be on track in that category, except we would like to buy some of those FY26 devices for our students and prepay some software subscriptions this year. Then in special education, we had some savings. That's from that non-public tuition. And again, that's an account or that's a type of expense that can really vary widely from year to year due to one or two students. It just depends on their situation, their placement, the services they require, and sometimes, you're surprised by what those services are. So this year, we always like to make sure we have enough budgeted, and this year we just did not have the utilization. Student services, we had some savings there. Again, it's kinship care. Is a situation where our students are being residing with relatives in another county. We get billed for those students by the other county. It's a process throughout the state of Maryland. Our history on that can vary significantly from year to year. It's really hard to predict what those billings, who's going to be in our county, out of our county. So anyway, we had some savings there this year, and we'd like to use that for some of these other needs. Under transportation, we had a bit of savings, mainly from one of the probably the single biggest one was dual enrollment transportation. We had budgeted, I believe, $25,000 for dual enrollment transportation, and we aren't running those buses. We haven't had the need to do separate bus runs, so we've had a savings there. Now, where we would like to spend some of these savings is in operation of plant. We talked early in the year about some of the things in plant ops. It seems I didn't print my handy dandy list. Kevin, are you going to help me out here? I will say there's a big portion of it is buying custodial supplies for next year and starting our contract for custodial supplies next year.
Maintenance contract services, and it is some just overall general cost increases for services. But as Sarah said, it was also some prepayment of upcoming operational contracts and that type of thing. And also, I don't remember if the field, we also purchased, in addition to the contract services for fields, we also purchased
Equipment, yeah.
And I believe that was in operational as well.
It was. And then under maintenance of plant, we have,
There were some large expenses that came out of maintenance plant, one of which was $65,000-$70,000 for the, we had a boiler that had to be rebuilt at Easton High School. And there were a couple other kind of large maintenance, unforeseen, reactive maintenance stuff that we had to deal with. And in addition, just once again, kind of overall price increases for cost of maintenance. And we've been very lucky. I want to tout the maintenance staff that we have. The one thing that is a consequence of good maintenance staff, talented staff, we do a lot of work in-house, so there are no supply costs and that type of thing. So we had to kind of, it does something a little bit more than what we intended. So.
and then under fixed charges, we had a few cost overruns in fixed charges. College reimbursement is expected to run over by the end of the year by about $40,000. But the majority of that is us prepaying some FY26 cost in FY25. So this is sort of a pro forma financial statement. The column on the left would be if we did make those amendments. This is what our revised FY25 budget would look like. These are the same projections, and therefore we would be all within balance. You wouldn't see any negatives over here in this column like you were seeing before. So I would also like to point out with this revenue shortfall, because of the savings here, this $500,000 savings here in special ed, we're projecting an end-of-year underspend on our cost by $623,000. So these two net together to $183,000. So this is what I would expect to be adding to the fund balance this year. So we are not dropping a lot of additional money to our fund balance this year. We would be coming in very close to our budget. Yeah.
Questions for Mrs. Jones? And you need a vote?
I do need a vote, so I would need
Okay.
someone to make a motion for these transfers.
Ms. Whelan Cherry is not in the room right now.
Well, I have a question while she's not here. Can you tell me what our fund balance is?
I believe we started the year with $6 million. I could be wrong on that. I need to double check. I get my years confused.
And best practice for fund balance is to have how much?
Well, our policy is up to 16%, and I believe we were at, I take that back, Mrs. Bridges. We're at $8 million fund balance. Because we're going to, our budget, the draft of the budget you've seen would say that we're going to use about 10% of that balance. GFOA, as Ms. Jackson alludes to, would say up to 16%, which is about 2 months of operating expenses. And that is what our board policy is, up to 16%. So we're at about 10% currently.
Any more questions for Mrs. Jones? I have one. I'm sorry if I'm kicking a hornet's nest with this. When we start talking about next year's budget, will we base it off our final budget of this amended budget request? So when we say our budget increase is 10% or our budget increase is, only $3 million above, are we talking about the amended budget, which we're shifting a bunch of money into, or the one that we approved?
Well, keep in mind, if you look at the column on the left, we are not, sorry, oh my, what have I done? That's a coincidence. I don't even know how to do that. We are not changing our overall budget. Now, the individual categories. So when I would report to you, oh, well, instructional salaries is increasing by this or decreasing, it should be based on the amended budget. Yes. So I need to update all of my slides for Wednesday night to show you that. But overall, we're not asking for more money. So overall, our total expenditure budget is the same. Answer your question?
Yes and no. It's okay. I'll let it go.
So can you explain that? If the overall budget is the same, what are you asking? I don't.
Notice in the column on the right where it says requested budget amendment. Let me see if I can get this to work. Does it take a minute? Does anyone see the? You see it? I don't see it. Okay, there it is. Notice we've got negatives and positives, and the bottom line is zero. So I'm just taking money out of one area and shifting it to another. So I'm not asking for any more money, just redistributing it.
And that's something that we can't just do it alone. We have to go before the county to do that, to show them those shifts.
I'd like to move.
Go ahead, unless there are any more questions.
Okay, did you just explain why you were moving it? The fund balance?
So back here, where you see the number 480,000, we want money in other instructional costs to buy for our students for next year. In other words, we would be able to
remove $480,000 from our FY26 budget because we would pay for those things early in FY25. And the same goes for, not everything in here is prepaying items. I mean, so the three bottom numbers, the 405, the 290, and the 740, these are to prepay some things, as well as these are categories where we just, a budget's a guide, and we try and live, we're living within the checkbook, but sometimes we spend more in this area than that area. So it's a combination of where we, for example, the board directed us to take a different approach to our fields and our field maintenance, and we said that's going to come with the price. We're going to go over, and I'll be coming to you with a budget transfer request to cover that. That's part of that.
Sorry to step out for a minute. I don't know if anybody asked this already, but when we make these kind of changes, does the county council ever question any of this, or is this kind of an expectation?
I've had both experiences. They will certainly, highlight the fact that we had some vacancies and instructional vacancies, and I'll be able to talk to that, and Dr. Papakai's going with me. She'll be able to talk to that. One of the things we, and I get it from their perspective, what they don't want to see is we have these savings, and all of a sudden we've dropped $4 million to our bottom line. So I think one of the things that should be reassuring to them is, we operated really close to our budget. We're adding $183,000, and I can't do the math out of, an $80 million budget, but that's a really small margin. We can never overspend, so you always have to underspend, right? I think that's a win for us. We aren't adding a lot to our fund balance, and one of the things that I did do differently, and we talked a little bit about it when we went through the FY26 budget, was I allowed for let me see how to say this. I put in an allowance for savings from vacancies. In other words, what we've historically done in the past is said every single position that's in our budget is going to be filled every day that it's supposed to be filled. And I did not do that for next year. I put it all in, and then we did some analysis of what our vacancy has looked like in various departments, and we took a portion of that and said, all right, let's assume history is going to repeat, and we will reduce our salary request by this amount of money. And it added up to the version you've seen, about 700,000. Based on what you're going to see later tonight, it's closer to 800,000.
I'd like to move approval of the FY25 budget as amended, as proposed by Mrs. Jones.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Jones. Moving on to unfinished business, we are going to have a presentation about the TCPS Employee Health Center with Mrs. Jones, and I see representatives from Marathon Health here, and I also see Mr. Milton Nagel, who is the president, CEO, the big boss at MABE.
The big kahuna. Okay, so the next agenda item is the TCPS Employee Health Center update. We refer to it sometimes as the Marathon Project that this board approved last summer. And the reason we're talking about it tonight, because it is an approved item, is we need direction from the board as we make final budget decisions later. We deliberate final budget decisions tonight because the original funding source is not currently available. As you know, we previously informed the board, the U.S. Department of Education closed the funding for COVID grants back in March. We had intended to use COVID funding to pay for the renovation of the health center space and the entire first year of operations. There is a lawsuit, state of New York, that state of Maryland and other states have joined into to challenge the U.S. Ed directive. I checked on the status of that last week with the legal services representative at MABE. And just today, MABE had a legal update,
with a real nice summary on the case. So I'm just stealing a page out of that update with Milt's knowledge now. I knew MABE is providing value once again. So the part I want to highlight is this is what happened last week. The judge on the case basically said, he had issued an injunction that said, US Ed, you have to stop. You can't enforce this stoppage of these COVID funds. He renewed that injunction indefinitely. And so that's very promising. But the piece that I need to highlight is we aren't the grant recipient. The state of Maryland is the grant recipient. So Maryland State Department of Education is the grant recipient. We're a grant subrecipient like all the other LEAs across the state that still have funding outstanding. So MSDE controls these grant funds. I have had no guidance from MSDE that I'm allowed to start spending this. So I don't know their timetable. I don't know the likelihood that what this means for us, but I do just want the board to be aware that it is possible we will have these COVID funds reinstated and we can rely on them to accomplish what we originally intended to accomplish. However, this is new information in the last couple days, and in the meantime, we need to make plans for if these COVID funds do not become available, what would we do? So we have a few invited guests here tonight to add to the discussion, including some options for financing it with local non-grant funds. So with us tonight, as Ms. Jackson said, we have Milton Nagel, CEO of MABE, who first brought us the concept of partnering with Marathon. His advocacy is based on many years of experience with Care First. He knows our ESMIC Health Alliance very well and has a deep knowledge of our health insurance benefits. Also with us is Stuart Setley, Vice President for Bolton Partners. Bolton is our employee benefits consultants, and they worked with Marathon to develop this concept of an employee health center as a win-win for both employers and us as an employer and our employees. And finally, we welcome Mark Schubert, Vice President of Marathon Health, who has worked with us for the past 2 years to open this health center. So, gentlemen.
Very good. Yes. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to come in and connect this evening. I'm actually going to call up Milton Stewart first to give a little bit of background. And then with our time together, we know that some of this there's some new board members, so we want to give a little why. And then get into kind of the bottom line around the decisions as well. So want to have discussion, we'll take your questions as well. But yeah, I'll turn it over to Milt to get us started.
Don't touch anything, Mark. Don't touch anything. If you haven't learned that yet, don't touch anything. Because now we have a blue screen. It's okay. That means you're going to...
Speak from the heart.
Yeah, well, I don't have any... I am going to speak from the heart. So I spent a career in Caroline County and retired in June of 21 and had the fortune to go to MABE to continue to work in the public sector. So I bring a total of 34, almost 35 years of public service in the K-12 field. And when I was in Caroline County, I was primarily initially the CFO, and throughout my career, largely responsible for the budget, but also, and through that process, saw the single largest year-over-year increasing line item in the budget, that being healthcare. And I can tell you personally that in my career in Caroline County, I know we had a number of employees, specifically on the support service side of the house, that work for the school system for the benefits and work for the school system for little to no paycheck because their portion of health care costs came out of their paycheck because their spouse was self-employed, either in agriculture or in some sort of industry, whether it be construction or some sort of self-employed industry. And that's a recruitment and a retention tool. Is the benefits. Certainly the retirement is also a recruitment and retention tool, but what separates Talbot County Public Schools or any other school system from the neighboring school system. And here on the shore, celebrating our 30th year is the ASMAC Health Insurance Alliance, which includes Talbot County Public Schools as well as the surrounding school districts. You all offer the exact same benefit structure. So moving from Talbot County to a neighboring school system, you're going to have the exact same benefit structure. You may have a different pricing structure because you're still individually rated, but the benefits that you receive from Care First are going to be identical. And the co-pays are going to be identical. And going back to seeing that rapid year-over-year increase in the cost to provide that very rich benefit, later in my career I started to really get concerned about how long is this sustainable? How long can we continue to offer this really rich Cadillac benefit that is so crucial to all of our employees? At what point does it become unsustainable? And you folks have and are every year seeing ever-constrained budgets, exasperated by the blueprint now. But even before the blueprint, just, it's a yearly battle when you go to the commissioners and ask for more money, especially in a rural area. It's just tough. And so I started to really work with our partners at Bolton about what are some other things that we can do to help control this year-over-year cost increase. And I learned a lot, and fortunately Bolton brought Stuart Sutley on board. That he comes with a rich background of establishing these health centers in the for-profit world primarily, and learned a lot by asking them to teach us, educate us on why this makes sense, and learned a lot about the fee-for-service model versus the per month fee of an all-you-can-eat health center program, and how that over time helps to control your overall spend. And so going to MABE post-pandemic, I really saw an opportunity to explore that further, and partnered with MACo. MACo has endorsed this program, and so that they represent all 24 county governments, because as I started to work with other school districts around the state, many of them had very close relationships with their county government, and they shared health costs with them. They had their own little consortium. So I couldn't go talk to the school system without also talking to the county. But the MACo board ultimately endorsed the marathon model as presented by Bolton. And so together we go out and try to educate folks on why this makes sense. And there, as you know, some of you have toured the facility in Queen Anne's County. There's also a health center in Wycomico County here on the shore, and we're working with other jurisdictions to create additional health centers, because I truly believe it is the path forward to try to decrease wait times for comprehensive primary health care, because timely comprehensive primary health care is key to sustained long-term outcomes and lowering additional costs that occur as a result of folks not receiving comprehensive primary health care. Because in your own population of employees and their dependents, arguably a third of them don't even have a primary health care provider that they can go see. And even if they have one identified, what's the wait time? And if they have an emerging issue, can they get in to see them, or do they end up in another facility like an urgent care facility or the emergency room? Either one of those come with a lot more costs to your plan. And so those costs drive premiums because you're in a fully self-insured program. Your premium increase year over year is based on utilization. And so how do you drive that cost down? You drive down utilization and push it to more comprehensive primary care where folks can be healthier longer, and unnecessary referrals aren't needed any longer, and you have a healthier workforce and healthier dependents, and so that also helps to decrease absenteeism, which decreases the amount of substitutes that you need. And by the way, and this is my last comment, congrats to Sarah. $183,000 out of a $77 million budget. I did the math. I was sitting there. I was ready to raise my hand. 0.2%. Okay, that's not even, that's break even at best. So I hope June ends up as in the black for you guys. Thank you, and I'll be around for questions.
Why don't you come over?
So good evening, everybody. Stuart Sutley with Bolton, and I'm just going to a few more comments, and we can move through this pretty quickly. Prior to coming to Bolton about 3.5 years ago, I ran the health center business for Johns Hopkins Medicine and had probably put in about 50-some health centers in my career. First off, I love them. The results are there. We see the returns on investment, but as much as anything, it always becomes the number one rated benefit for employees who work within the employers that have them. So a couple quick things. When we finally kind of got this off the ground, yes, we went to MABE and we went to MACO. We also went to the state, and we presented this to the state of Maryland as a concept, and they got behind us not only in getting Bolton introduced to the MSDE grants, so we helped position Marathon to receive the grant dollars that Ms. Jones was talking about, but we have also been the recipient for the last 3 years of getting state funding to help with some of the build-out costs of these health centers. And just as late as last Sunday, to be quite honest, it's the only time that the Senator Guzon, who is the head of the budget and taxation for the state, could do a call. He wanted an update on the health centers because now, between the comptroller having seen the health centers and some of the statistics we're getting out of the ones that are open, there's consideration by the state for doing this for all state employees eventually because they're seeing the benefits. Lastly, I'll just say that we have support from Care First. So Queen Anne's County and Queen Anne's County Public Schools are rolling out a health center health plan that's endorsed by Care First. So starting 9/1, any employees who select this Care First plan and get their annual physical at Marathon, the employer and employee, there's a 7% reduction in the premiums that Care First is recognized through actuarial analysis, so that's a big plus. And lastly, University of Maryland Medical System has also become very aware of what we're doing, and we have sat down as late as last week and talked about specific locations such as Talbot, such as Easton, where Midshore could help put together programs to help support Talbot schools, for example, with maybe some fixed pricing around imaging and services that vary greatly. So bottom line is there has been some tremendous support across the state and by different constituencies for this health center concept. And lastly, I'll just say the whole reason for doing this, I came to Bolton. I could have stayed at Hopkins and lived the good government life at Hopkins, as I used to say. But I came because they said, we've got clients in the public sector where we cannot continue to take these increases, and we need to put in strategies to help mitigate future increases and keep benefits valuable to the members. And that's why I came here, and that this is the strategy that we are working on across the state of Maryland.
Thanks so much, Stuart and Milt. Appreciate the background for everyone. So real quickly, just want to highlight the model a little bit. And what you see here is, so why does a company like a Marathon Health exist? And I think a lot of us in the room even have probably had experience where we've had difficulty getting into care, whether your primary care provider retired or moved to concierge care. We just see, all across the country, folks having access issues to getting to primary care, getting to mental health care type of resources. When you're in your appointment, right, you see a waiting room full of folks. Typically, the appointment's about 10 to 12 minutes. Your doc's in there. They're, typing away, charting into the computer, not having a whole lot of interaction and time with them. And again, it's not the docs. It's the way the model is set up. It's based on volume, right? Not value. Volume, not value. In addition, we see a lot of health systems purchasing primary care. What does that mean? It becomes a feeder to hire more costly care and a reference mechanism for those providers. So we really want to look at it differently. And that's what Marathon does. We partner with employers to explore and then implement these health centers. And within the health center, the only folks that are able to come and use it are individuals whose employer sponsors it, meaning Again, you have an employee, a teacher, their family members that are on the health plan, they have access. That means fewer people are accessing the health center, which means that we can guarantee same day and next day access. So no more waiting weeks or even potentially months to get in. Same day, next day access to care. So think about the value there. Then while you're with your provider, again, because we're not seeing folks off the street, this is not an insurance-based program, it's sponsored by the employer, we're able on average to spend about 30 minutes with our patients. So imagine that, right? You get more time with your provider, you can build a better relationship, you're seeing them on average 4 or 6 times per year. That's what's going to create better overall outcomes for the patient, and then you all as the employer who's self-funding the health plan. So really what we get is a comprehensive model where folks can come in, they get primary care, so all of your age and gender, men's health, women's health. We take care of pediatric populations 12 plus. We also do urgent care. So anything that you would see all these urgent care centers popping up, sprains, strains, sick visits. You come in, you have strep throat. You come into the health center, again, same day, next day, access to care. And then this next part, put on your health consumer hat, right? And what's a frustration that we all have? Maybe we have to go one place for our doctor's visit, then we have to go to the lab, then we have to go to the pharmacy. And what happens? People are busy. They don't take care, they don't make the next trip. They don't go get their labs. This whole model is about optimizing the site of care. So I know we had a field trip at one point, and some of you were able to go over to the Queen Anne Center. And what we always hear is, wow, everything's right there. There's a lab right in the center. We're doing lipid panel tests, all different tests that you would go to a LabCorp or a Quest. In addition, we dispense medications right out of the health center. So we're typically carrying around 185 to 200 generic medications. Those are both acute and maintenance meds. So you have a bad sore throat, you could go in and get antibiotics. If you're needing to manage high blood pressure or cholesterol, we can prescribe those medications out of the health center as well. Mental health is a common challenge. We know that roughly 1 in 4 adults over the age of 18 have a mental health challenge within a given year. In all of our appointments, our providers, who we actually go out and hire, in this case, we'll be hiring an advanced practice provider, so a physician assistant or nurse practitioner who can prescribe meds. They would screen folks for anxiety, depression, and based on that result, we would either connect them with the EAP, we can manage prescriptions, et cetera. So really, it's about taking care of whole person health, and whether you're a pediatric patient that's 5 years old with a bad ear infection, or you're a 55-year-old male coming in for your annual physical, we can take care of your needs here. And then the other thing, so what's another barrier to care for folks? What it costs. And we see that even when it's a $20, $30 copay, people will go without care. This model, there are no copays. Again, it's not an insurance product. There's not a deductible. The cost is covered in a fixed monthly payment by the schools. The employees, spouses, eligible dependents, they come to the health center. They don't reach for their pocketbook once. They come in, they have their visit. There's no out-of-pocket cost for them. We're really proud of what we've all collectively built in Maryland. I can tell you in the last 2.5 years, we've put health centers in with obviously Queen Anne's, Wycomico, St. Mary's, Washington County Public Schools, and just recently signed with Harford County. We'll be putting a center in Bel Air. So we've really grown out this model, and Frederick County as well. So we've really built out this model, and I think this is a proof point that folks are ready to make a fundamental change in how they're purchasing health care and how they're creating access to health care for employees. And also, I just want to highlight this too. The goal is to create a comprehensive network, if you will, across Maryland, so that as you folks travel throughout the state, or you have children that are going to college, or school in another part of the state, they can use these centers reciprocal access for acute care when everyone using their home base for primary care. But you would be able to go to any of these centers. It would pop up on our app. You'd be able to get an appointment for acute care if you're going through Hagerstown for whatever reason. So it supports this broader partnership across entities throughout the state of Maryland. Again, some proof points. I want to actually call on Stuart to talk through this. So this is Queen Anne's County Public Schools. We've got a couple years of data. Obviously, in their health center, it's both the schools and the county sharing the center. But we've got some really great results, and Stuart and his team have been working hard to pull forward data, show value, et cetera, and these are some of the statistics that we have to date.
Yeah, thanks. I'll go through this pretty quickly, but one of the benefits or one of the responsibilities of Bolton is we actually validate this data. So there are performance guarantees that we have built into the contract. So there are fees at risk if Marathon does not meet certain criteria on an annualized basis. And so we kind of third-party validate that. This is a presentation that I just made last month to the Queen Anne's County Board of Education. And, real quick, this was data. The center had been open at the time for about 15 months with this data. And in that 15-month period, I'm not going to read through each one, but here was the biggest opportunity that I was really surprised of seeing. The biggest takeaway was how many employees with chronic conditions are using the health center. That is an absolute win. So some people think, oh, this will just be an urgent care and the healthy people go use it. And what we're finding is more and more people today, one, they're losing providers due to retirement, consolidation. In the last 6 months in Maryland alone, it's estimated that about 50 to 60 primary care physicians have gone concierge care. So they no longer take insurance. You pay them $2,500 a year. So we're creating some challenges there. But many folks with chronic conditions are going to the health center, one, I think because they don't have to make all these consistent out-of-pocket payments, but as Mark Schubert said, they can get everything done in one place and continually have those check-ins. So we've seen some really good utilization with people with multiple chronic conditions. The Net Promoter Score is 94 out of 100. If you know anything about Net Promoter Scores for primary care in the United States, it's about 20 or so. Cable companies are a little higher, so if that gives you a little feel for it, and that's not the provider's fault at all. That is really the system and the fact that, we've got to wait, we've got all this. So the fact that you've got a 94 Net Promoter Score based on employee feedback is pretty substantial. And then, again, coming down through this, you'll just see about utilization, how many people with significant improvement in things like A1C, blood pressure, BMI reductions, and that is, again, because they can spend time. So whether an employee goes once a month or 30 times a month to the health center, the cost to the school district is still the same. The cost to the member is none. So we're seeing this increased utilization by those who need it, and that's a wonderful thing, not only from a cost management standpoint, but again, we believe just the satisfaction that employees and their families will have being members of the Talbot School Board.
So it's a little bit of background on the why, and just to clarify on one of the points on the previous slide too. So you see the urgent care, ER visits avoided. Where does this concept save an employer money? It's redirecting existing spend that you all have out and you're spending today. You're self-funded. So every time somebody goes to the urgent care or the emergency department, you're getting hit with that claim. The idea with this model is to rechannel as much of that care from variable quality, variable cost out in the community into the fixed costs of the environment. And if we can reduce those claims above the cost, we've broken even and then eventually saved money. So this is going back a little bit. We have a data-driven process to identify where would we position the center. So we worked with of course, the Bolton folks. We looked at census data. of course, you know, the highest area of density across the population, right in Easton. This is important because of how much we just talked about. This model is about being accessible. So we don't want this center to be in a place that's hard to get to. We want it really easy for folks to get to it when, you know, if they need to go during the workday so that they can get back to work. So again, have an idea of where it's positioned. We actually signed a lease, 508 Idlewild, not too far from here, and that's the facility that was chosen. At the outset, we always provide an estimate on what are the startup fees. Essentially, think about it. We're creating a doctor's office, right? So we go out, we went out into the community, we found a second-generation medical space that we're essentially giving a facelift to. And that allows us to come in at a much lower price point to convert the facility than what we had originally estimated. So I think, Sarah, we estimated around $598,000 for conversion costs, and I think that total project ended up being around $250,000-$300,000 because it was second-gen medical space. So we bill as we incur costs. So to date, we've invoiced the schools $158,000. The estimate, so everything has been paused on the construction. Obviously, as Sarah mentioned, the funds aren't there. We estimate, pretty conservatively, $250,000 to complete the remaining implementation from where we are currently. And that's to get the health center, finish the build out, get all the equipment, all the medical equipment, IT, et cetera, into the center. So a big part of our model, right, is it's not just about the access. It's how is this going to save the schools money and help you better control your healthcare spend. And so what this slide shows are kind of two key elements. What is the monthly fee? So the monthly fee, you can see everything that goes into it. Essentially, that's all the care, that's all the service. The biggest line item that's driving that fee is the staff. So having that medical assistant plus the medical provider in there, plus all of our services. So the monthly fee, which includes, we baked in the lease from 508 Idlewild. Yeah, why did I put Idlewild? Idlewild. I thought I had it right the first time. I'm gonna have to get whoever. Yeah, I know. Thank you. Yeah. So 61,875 includes that lease. That's baked in. We have a set monthly fee. So again, that's 61,875. That's all the care, the hours, about 40 hours of operational time each week. We pass through any labs, vaccinations, or generic drugs out of the health center as they're dispensed or incurred. So on average, we estimate the schools will have around 2,500 monthly for the medicine, injections, labs, et cetera. And then on the right side, that's where we show, and I'll get into exactly how we calculate it, but these are the return on investment figures. So a healthy return on investment where it's based on engagement, right? So again, if we're rechanneling from folks using urgent, emergency department, and we're having them come into the health center, we have to drive a certain amount of folks in there to hit these numbers. And so that's where we've really worked hard with the Bolton team to have conservative year one, year two engagement as we ramp. And so basically this is saying if we can get a unique population across employees, spouses, and dependents of 32.4% in year one, then modestly increase that to 34% year two, and then 36% for years 3 and beyond. That could produce a gross savings of around $8 million. When you net out the cost of the health center, we're looking at a net savings of $3.7 million. So how did we actually get that? So actually, I probably shouldn't leave the mic area. But so we look at this. It's a 5-year projection. So the top, that's what the health center costs. That's the 65,000 times 12, plus the estimation on the medication and labs. That gives us a total. It looks at the year zero. That's the implementation expense kind of at the max end. And then in projected healthcare savings, that's your spend today. So around $10.8 million. We estimate in the first year, we would redirect, rechannel, and create savings around $629,153, which comes out in the red for the first year of around $143,000. In year two, again, we're going from that 34% unique engagement up to 36% unique engagement. And in that year, we estimate we'll be able to save the schools around $1 million, and we hit a break even in year two. And then we trend that forward. The medical and RX claims without the health center, that's increasing. We use 6% annually, could be more than that, but generally using 6%. And then the savings trend, again, is based on those engagement levels and our benchmarks for redirecting care for similarly situated clients, school districts. And so again, that gives us a gross of about 7.9 and a net of about 3.7.
Can you go back to
Yes.
that? Just want to point
Yeah.
something out. On that top line, that 784,100, that was the original
That's right.
estimate of what it was going to cost to build out the center, and I think we're coming in a good $200,000 below that. So,
Correct.
you know, at some point we'll update the chart, but
Yes.
just to let you know, that's a savings.
That's right. And we had put a not to exceed on that as well, but we're coming in below, and that's because we found that facility that allowed us to come in at a lower entry point. So some considerations, right? MABE has generously agreed to provide $300,000 toward this effort. Thank you, Milton, for that opportunity. So that's one way of kind of on one end looking at it. We have $300K that can go towards the remaining startup costs to get everything up and running, and we would have potentially even a $50,000 kind of surplus there. And then on the other side of the coin, Sarah had asked us to kind of look at what would it take to exit the contract. The biggest cost would be essentially having to eat the lease over a 60-month term, so that's around $176,000. We would have to do a little bit of work to undo some of the things we've done over at the property. Our team estimated around $40K there, so around $216,000 to walk away, so to speak. Questions, discussion?
So I'm just curious, what type of lease was this? I mean, it was for 5 years,
5-year lease, yep.
and,
If you know where that is, where Bombay Todka is.
but was it a triple net type of lease where we're responsible for utilities and
Yes.
everything? Okay. Question on the meds.
Yeah.
So if you have a client who needs a specialized medication, and I know there are some programs where they can, back in the old days, they called them indigent programs. I know that's not the correct terminology now, but where they could get it for reduced cost or free. Are we going to be providing them with the medication we have on hand, or will there be some instruction with trying to get a patient
Yep.
a different one?
So let me take the first point, and then I know where you're going to go. So in the center, we'll dispense that medication based on their need. If it's something that they can write, the providers can write prescriptions for specialty meds. We just wouldn't have them in the health center. We're just carrying generic meds. We don't have any controlled substances in there. And again,
It's not going to limit the patient? Okay.
no.
No, and if I could just, I think one other thing you were asking there, great question. So if they write a prescription, it'll just go through the traditional Care First plan through CVS. The provider can submit the prescription. The employee can pick it up or it can get sent home. But the other thing is there are programs that we are focused on that if somebody meets certain criteria based on zip code, salary range where there are discount programs that are available by either the manufacturer or actually through the state. And we've actually just had a call with the state about some healthcare pricing. So from Bolton's standpoint, we have been giving that information to the clinicians at the various health centers to educate them, to help steer people to other potential costs that honestly their providers wouldn't know in the community. So that's a nice benefit.
So my husband works in Queen Anne County. He loves it.
Oh, good.
So,
Glad to hear that.
oh, and will this affect, I know there won't be a copay, you said, so I guess it won't affect the healthcare, the cafeteria plans for the healthcare? Or could it?
Correct. It doesn't impact our, so you can go to the Marathon Health Center. I mean, if you need to go see a specialist or you need a service they don't provide, you need orthopedic service or something, then you go to your orthopedist. I mean, we offer an open access plan through our traditional plan, so.
But the benefit there again is that the provider at Marathon is actually setting appointments for the specialists. So, again, that's a wonderful thing if you don't have to do it yourself. So they're working with you to find who in the Care First plan based on location, convenience, et cetera, because the clinicians have access to the Talbot benefits plan. So they're steering people appropriately to best docs, best facilities, et
The
cetera.
providers have a nice tool built into their electronic medical record that allows them to identify highest quality, lowest cost providers that are in network. And then on top of that, again, we know that folks, they'll get a referral, but then they'll never make the appointment. We actually do the referral navigation, help them get connected with that provider, set the appointment.
So you're talking to an old home health nurse, so you're
So watch what you say.
and a realtor. So I have two careers going on here. So so that's a lot of case management, and you have one nurse practitioner or PA and two medical assistants. When are you going to bring in the nurse?
So two things. So great question. So first off, the MAs do a lot of that work, the medical assistants. New to the ESMEC health plan. Do you understand what I meant by ESMEC? So we just introduced, and it's being introduced to all the members at open enrollment as we speak, that we have a case manager nurse that is now working between the health plans, Marathon, and Care First. So that was actually something that my firm, actually, we hired this nurse. We're doing it for several of our clients where we're seeing challenges in appropriate steerage. And some of that is due to lack of access. So right now, unfortunately on the Eastern Shore, you don't have as much access as the Western Shore. So we're seeing where people are avoiding care, not showing up for appointments. So I could tell you more about it later, but we actually have this nurse available to help with that. And we just kicked it off exactly for that reason.
And then last question, is there any possible way that we can, as a group, work to, I don't want to say, put get an attorney so that we can make sure that we can get some of those funds? I'm not saying it right, but.
Oh, sure.
You
The
know,
COVID
that
funds or-
MSDE is getting, that we can go to the state through MSDE and say, hey, we have this thing and can we?
Ms. Jones has already done that application. Correct, Ms. Jones?
Yeah, I mean, we had $1.4 million in the COVID funds set aside, appropriated, approved, and then USAID shut us down. So the state is part of the lawsuit, so once the dust settles, I mean, if the lawsuit remains favorable, then I'm sure we will get some kind of guidance from MSDE.
I'm just saying, so it ends up here in Talbot County and doesn't stay over on the Western Shore being utilized for something else.
No, I mean, we have a funded amount. I mean, it's very specific. We have an approved grant application.
That's right.
Any other questions?
I have, I guess, clarifying questions. So we talked about Marathon being available to all employees, their dependents, and then I also heard eligible employees and their dependents. So is there opportunity for those staff members who do not carry benefits for the public school system, with the public school system, to go to Marathon and receive care?
That's go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say, I can answer this because we hammered this all out, Dr. Horsey and I and our team. We are making this available to all Talbot benefit eligible Talbot County Public Schools employees, whether they carry our insurance or not. So if I did not have our insurance because my husband had some great insurance, I could still go, my husband could still go. We do have employees who are not benefit eligible. For example, our substitute teachers are not eligible for benefits, so they would not qualify to be seen. But anyone that's eligible to get our benefits could be seen, and their families and their dependents.
Is
Our
that-
retirees, let me add that, our retirees as well.
So let me get to the first part. Is that calculated in the projections at all? Like, do we know how many people are not eligible, benefit eligible? And is that outside of these numbers that are projected?
For our full-time employees, we have almost no employees that are not eligible. I mean, because most of our employees are full-time. It's really just coaches and substitutes, people that are part-time and hourly and can choose whether they want to work or not.
That's what I meant. Okay. And secondly, the retirees, is it retirees starting retirement in 2024, 2025?
No, if they've retired 25 years ago and they're on our retiree insurance, they could be seen. If their spouse is on, some retirees, when they retire, their spouse is not eligible, and that is because it kind of depends on what you have in place on the day you retire. If you retire and your spouse never had coverage, then in retirement, your spouse won't have coverage. But if your spouse did have coverage at the date of retirement, then they are on our retirement plan and they would be seen as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And can you speak a little bit, I think, for the newer members on the board about discussions around partnering with other, agencies? You talked about the county, other school
Sure.
systems, because, although Caroline County, they would have to drive to Easton. However, a lot of the population from Caroline County, from Dorchester County, are already traveling to Easton because this is a central hub. And Caroline County is a little bit different as far as access to care as, Talbot County is.
Yeah, if I could speak to that. So what we've seen so far is, except for one exception, which was Queen Anne's County and School, which jumped into this together, all the other entities that Mark laid out, one of them started first. So Wicomico School started first. The county came on about 6 months later. They just didn't want to do all the heavy lifting. Same thing happened at St. Mary's. Same thing happened is happening at Frederick and Washington County Public Schools. But also with permission of the board of the school, other employers can be reached out to see if they're willing to join. But that is a decision for you all to make. We don't ever want to have somebody that you might be competing against for talent, for example, where they're just not a good representative of the community. So the answer is yes, but the board gets that decision to make based on who can access.
And then the advantage of it is, so you all being the anchor, right? If you decide to allow other employers, they would have to pay an access fee. That access fee would essentially provide a credit on your monthly invoices. That helps you recoup your startup costs and then just lower, it's adding more lives to it. The other thing is, so the whole piece about how many providers and availability. So right now we'll have the provider 40 hours of operational time. If you all, at a certain point in time decided to allow other employers to utilize it, that's when we start looking at adding additional providers, which could extend the hours of availability and capacity. So that just becomes an option in the future.
But those providers' costs would be absorbed by those other
By the new-
employers. It wouldn't be adding cost to you all. So Wycomico Schools, prime example, they were 6 months in, and Wycomico County joined, and now they're getting a credit because the county per member per month credit against their invoice.
That's right.
Because they were the anchor.
I think it's worth mentioning that at the first presentation of Marathon Health, which was Everside then, they presented to a joint meeting of us and the county council. It was years ago, and the county council did not bite. They were not interested at that time. But knowing them and their financial interests, I think that if this was up and running and as an option to them, available to them, I think that we could go back and re-present, and they might be more interested.
I think Dr. Papakai has had just an offhand conversation with the town of Easton as well. I mean, I think I hear your idea about other surrounding counties, but again, this does give us perhaps a competitive advantage in terms of what we can offer to our employees. So that would be something we'd also want to weigh in when we consider who. And it doesn't have to be a government entity. It could be a private employer. It could be the Maritime Museum. It could be, a private employer too.
Yeah, I think it's great conceptually. I'm just thinking more broader when we talk about social determinants of health and where we are right now in our rural communities and how this could be a benefit not only to Talbot County Public School, but maybe another entity that could join in. And so I guess following that, I just wanted to see if there is possibility, and it sounds like it is, to amend our contract to be able to allow other entities to join in, which we could possibly recoup some startup costs.
That is in the contract already, but again, it would only be upon your approval. So we did make sure that was already in the contract.
That's right.
I also had heard from a board member a question about Marathon's presence, and you kind of touched on how we work with and sort of the positive synergy with University of Maryland system and with I can't think who else, but with Care First. But there was a question specifically brought up about Choptank Health. So we do have Choptank Health Centers in our schools. Their primary focus is to serve our students, not our staff. They do have a clause in their contract that says they will see staff for a injury and acute illness. So our staff are not able to go to Choptank to manage their diabetes, to manage their asthma, to get a physical. It's not an option. And the visits that they do have with Choptank does charge insurance. So they're paying co-pays and we're paying the visit cost. Bolton provided some information, some utilization. It's not particularly high. I think in 2024, we had 500 total visits across our schools. So, I mean, that is 500 visits, and I think it was a cost of about $70,000 to the health plan and maybe around 20 to the employees. So to them, they could, if they're acutely sick, they think they have strep, they want to walk down the hall to the Choptank Center, absolutely, they can and should do that because it's easy. But if they want a physical, their child needs a sports physical, they are sick and they're at home, they can go to that Marathon Center for no cost. So, and also the Choptank centers in our schools are lovely, but not every school has one that's open and operating full-time. Some schools do, but others will have the Choptank nurse there one day a week or something.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, Mr. Nagel and I actually went and met with Choptank's leadership and then took them to see the Queen Anne's facility to show them that we all can work together. And here's what the Marathon facility does and how can we get referrals, for them to think top of mind, that if they have an employee that comes in, that they should be sending them there for one of the main reasons, because there is no out-of-pocket. So for members starting 9/1 of this year, any visit to a Choptank facility will have a $50 copay from the member. And again, as Ms. Jones said, that hits your health plan too as a charge. So we want to make sure Choptank understands that and is trying to do the best they can for the employees to get them to Marathon so they're not spending that out of pocket. and they're using the care that's provided to them by the health plan.
And I've also had personal experience where a CHOP tank was full. Like they couldn't see a sick child because the provider was booked solid.
So I just want to thank Mr. Schubert, Mr. Nagel, and Mr. Sutley for coming today to give us sort of this background and this update on why the board wanted to provide this. Are there other questions before they leave?
I hope we get this through.
How long is the contract?
It's a 5-year. 5 years. Yep. So again, we have a contract, whether, we're going to talk about this in the context of the budget and amendment in a minute. But again, just wanted you to understand the model and the benefits of the health center.
And I understand that there's a dashboard where we will be able to see metrics to determine utilization as well as patient satisfaction. So I was wondering if that is that in the contract that we would be able to receive that information?
Yes, you'll be receiving regular reporting at least on a monthly cadence.
And is there anything in there if we perform underutilization?
Yes, there are performance guarantees. Do I need to go further? There are performance guarantees built into the contract itself based on utilization, based on provider net promoter scores, and based on clinical outcomes. So that's one of the things that we helped craft together from Bolton's perspective to put across all these health centers. So there was consistency and also, quite honestly, skin in the game for Marathon to meet certain objectives.
Thank you so much. And this is my very last question, just curious. Have you noticed that the businesses, not Marathon, but Talbot County Public Schools or whatever school system, if they have to carry a malpractice insurance?
No, we carry that. We hold the liability insurance, malpractice insurance, et cetera.
So you hold it for both entities, not
Yeah.
just Marathon?
Correct.
Okay. And we will be able to see that, verify it?
It's all in the contract.
Okay.
Yeah, because the employees are not employees of Talbot County Public Schools, they're Marathon employees, but that's a great question. And, so, it's a great step forward. It's a calculated risk because, it's a little bit of uncharted territory, but, not in Maryland, and certainly not, this is new to government, this is new to public sector in Maryland, but it's not new to the country. Marathon's a well-established country, Everside Health prior branding, in well over 40 states, I believe.
41 states,
41.
720 centers.
And in the private sector for a long, long time. In fact, here on the shore, Purdue has had a on-site health center for their employees for a long, long time. So the private sector has long recognized the importance of comprehensive primary care for their employees and dependents. And then finally, Madam Chair, Ms. Jackson, it's Executive Director, but I just prefer to be referred to as Milton from MABE. We're here to help. For the board members, thank you for your service on behalf of MABE. For the newer board members, that maybe weren't around to be able to attend our new board member orientation. We're having another one because there's some new appointed board members that take office around the state July 1. So in September, we're going to be having another one-day new board member orientation, and that information will be forthcoming. And conference registration for the annual fall conference, October 20th and 21st, is open. So hopefully you can attend and get that valuable networking with your colleagues around the state. And that was my infomercial at the end. And,
Stuck it in there. Stuck it in there. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for coming yet again. We always appreciate seeing you. And I just wanted to say thank you to Ms. Brundage for putting the links to your previous presentations in our report. So anybody who is watching from home, it's probably a million of you streaming this live right now, but anybody who's watching or catches this later on, you can click on those links to get the background if you happen to miss the first few meetings that they came, so you can get up to speed like everybody else. So I hope you found that helpful. And moving on to the next and the last item on our agenda is our FY '26 budget with Mrs. Jones.
Okay, so we are here at June 9th, talking about proposed changes to the FY '26 budget. Tomorrow night, June 10th, Dr. Papakaya and I will be talking to the county council, requesting their approval of these FY '25 budget transfers, which we need to know about prior to Wednesday night's board meeting on June 10th, because that's a piece of the puzzle that we need to know. And then evidently we're having another meeting on June 11th. So, okay, that's our board meeting. Okay, and then on June, we're having multiple board meetings. And then we'll get everything tidied up and into MSDE by June 30th. So here's first I'm going to start with an update on revenue. State revenue, or state appropriation. Guess what we don't have? We don't have it. We don't know. But there, ultimately, you know, the governor's budget had a lot of changes that would have been impactful for us, and those were all peeled back. And so we should be fine. I mean, there's always the chance that something could be a little different. They've been making some comments about, well, some enrollment numbers are a little different, but we're going to go with what we got. That's all we can do at this point, and I think it should come in pretty close or spot on. Then the one thing that related to state revenue that is going to have an impact on next year's budget is that non-public tuition we were talking about a little bit earlier. One of the things that did make it through the BRFA, or the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, was a change to the amount of money that they're willing to give us next year as reimbursement for non-public tuition. And so they reduced, basically there's a formula and blah, 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 but they reduced their reimbursement next year, and then there's going to be a further reduction in 2027. So we need to adjust for that in our revenue projections in our budget for next year. So as far as locally, Talbot County, thanks to, you know, great work by our public, by our board, they gave us an additional $600,000 for 9 positions, which I'll outline in a minute. So that end result meant that their final appropriation was $55.7 million, and we needed to trim about $5 million based on that. In the county's budget, they also gave us $260,000 to replace the stadium lights at St. Michael's High School Stadium. And then, of course, they're continuing to fund the chapel project, but that was all sort of approved last year. Other impact on local revenue, just to let you know, these are things that are not in our budget, they're in the county's budget, but I do want to give them sort of credit where credit's due. They do, you know, take out bonds to finance our construction of our past and present renovations and builds. And so they're paying $5.3 million in debt service on bonds related to Talbot County Public School buildings. There was one of the other things that made it through legislatively this year is there's a shift where the county has to pick up some of our state retirement costs for our teachers, and they're going to have to start paying any pre-K private providers in the county that meet certain criteria. So we had originally budgeted a certain amount of money for, I think around $815,000 for Easton High School auditorium lights in this year's budget. Mr. Schaefer's been working on that all year. At the May board meeting, this board approved the final contract. And the cost in that contract, as you know, was about $294,000 over what we had in this year's capital budget. So we need to fund that somehow. I was hopeful that we would have those funds available this year, but as you saw from earlier tonight, we aren't going to have that much available funding in all probability, or we would be really close. what we need to do then, and the work isn't going to start until next year, after June 30 anyway. We would need, and we are recommending to add $300,000 from our fund balance to pay for this upgrade. So that is how I've prepared the budget, assuming that scenario. So what I'm calling, okay, this column right here is the budget that you've previously seen. This was the budget you approved on February 12th. These are the changes that we just talked about. So $29,000, we're getting a little bit more money in pre-K. We should reduce our non-public placement expectations because we just aren't going to get that much money based on the new legislation. And this is the amount of money we need to cut from our Talbot County funding based on what we received from them, and then using some fund balance here. And that gets us to, it gives us total cuts of $5,032,000 and gets us to revenue of $81,071,000. So therefore, the goal is to reduce our budget by the same amount of money, $5,032,000. And so we started with looking at people, because people are our greatest cost. As you know, we had a large number of newly requested positions, 33 to be exact. So we knew we needed to reduce that list. And we also needed to evaluate who we have currently, the positions we currently have, and whether those were needed or could be shuffled to meet other needs. So we also needed to look at what we projected as a placeholder for our salary increases versus what our negotiations ended up coming in at. And then we looked at all other categories of expenditures. What can we eliminate or reduce, get a better price on? What can we prepay? In other words, take it out of next year's budget and pay for it with this year's funding? And are there any, unfortunately, any new things that we hadn't captured we need to count on? So that was our approach. Spoiler alert, we're going to get there. It's okay. We're gonna end up there. So of the 33 new positions, the 15 that we settled on and how they were funded are on this slide. The county council funded 9 of those positions, 2 social workers, 6 ESOL and special education assistants, instructional assistants. So specifically 2 ESOL, 4 special ed instructional assistants. Those are the ones Ms. Menchez was talking about. 1 special ed teacher for Easton Middle School. Again, what you heard from Ms. Menchez earlier tonight. We have the new money that we got for concentration of poverty for our community schools, for our 3 new community schools. So that money that's coming in is very specifically directed for community schools, and that entails 5 positions. And finally, compensatory ed we can use to pay for the athletic trainer. When we looked through, and this was like a whole spring project for a team of us, senior staff was involved, building leadership was involved, and we looked at vacant positions, and we looked at positions that were in buildings and we looked at enrollments. And based on that, we identified 3 currently vacant teacher positions, a position that we had added last year that we'd never been able to fill for a special ed supervisor, and 1 building had an instructional assistant for a very specific reason that reason didn't exist anymore. So that plus reducing some stipends for workshop netted to $480,000 in savings. Also, as you know, we scaled back summer school to just encompass the SCEP program, 6th grade academy and band camp. That ended up saving us $334,000. And all of those savings had an impact on FICA and state retirement of savings of $135,000. So salaries and fixed charges, $470,000 savings from those 2 items. Then we had, there was another piece of legislation that went through where for some weird reason in 2026, we don't need to pay a certain administrative charge we normally pay to Maryland State Retirement. They're going to catch up with us in 2027, but it's a savings for next year of $100,000. Our Care First renewal rates, I had included a 6% increase in the budget, and Stewart's firm, Bolton, came back and said, we can get you those rates down to a 4.5% increase. So that was a savings of $162,000. We would like to prepay some benefit cost, prepay them this year for next year, $550,000. And the one thing that added to cost was the ultimate cost of our salary negotiations. The ultimate outcome cost about $500,000 more than we had originally put in the budget, which we've known about for a little bit. So we had to factor that in. So those four things net to a $312,000 savings. In administration, bunch of little things added up to $29,000 in savings. In materials of instruction, we added those Yonder pouches in. I am going to talk with Ms. Spurrier. I forgot that there was a possibility we might be able to put those in a grant. I need to follow up with you tomorrow, find out about that. We had a little bit of money set aside for summer school materials of instruction, and just, this, that, and the other kind of added up to $24,000 across a couple different things. So that's about $20,000 in savings there. Other instructional cost. So here, this was a big area of savings because we are able to buy those student devices, the laptops, the iPads, in advance. So we're going to use some of our FY25 surplus, or we would like to use, I should say, to buy those devices and sign some agreements with, for some of the software we use in the classroom in advance. And then also, Mr. Wilson went through his budget again and, talked to a lot of the different people we contract with and was able to save on some of the software we're using, negotiate some better deals, or I think in a few cases we just kind of deferred a couple of things. And that the hardware contract savings of $66,000, that is the result of all the RFPs that we approved at the March or April meeting. Those came in $66,000 under the budget Mr. Wilson had set. We do have a grant that can pick up a piece of software, career counseling software. The tutoring here, we get a certain set amount of tutoring for elementary tutoring, and the budget we had set exceeded that by $58,000. It wasn't necessarily based on our current spending, so we felt comfortable cutting the expenditure back so it did not exceed the revenue we were getting. And then again, we just used a lot of different instructional software, and so there were a lot of different areas that is captured as various that added up to $87,000.
Can I ask you a quick question before you move on? About tutoring? Is that going to, I understand what you're saying, that we kind of over budgeted and we didn't actually use all of that. In cutting that's the one thing that I'm like, whoa, hey, how about we don't do that? Will that result in a material cut in tutoring services over what we've done this year? Or is it just sort of recalculating based on what we actually spend?
I think it's closer to what we actually spend. I believe it leaves $242,000 in the budget so almost $250,000 in the budget for tutors at the elementary schools.
Do you know, probably not, off the top of your head, what we spent on it? Did we spend $242,000 or did we spend like $300,000?
Let me follow up and see if I can come up with that number.
Okay, I'm disinclined to cut tutoring, as we heard often that it made a material impact.
I'm right there with you. That's the one thing that really draws my attention thus far in this discussion is, we're trying to get our testing scores up. We're trying to get students where they ought to be, and tutoring's a great way to do that.
I'm going to get back to you on Wednesday night with, or maybe in the meantime through an email with some more information on that. I know we underspent what we had set aside in this year's budget, and I think what we had originally budgeted for next year exceeded what we put in this year's budget. So I think we're going to be at a similar level to this year.
I mean, I'm speaking for me personally, and these guys are all behind me, so I can't see what they're saying. But if we're level setting to like where we were this year, that's fine. If we're cutting back on tutoring, that's where I say maybe we don't do that.
I had a few questions. The first thing that you mentioned was cutting back the 5 full-time positions, 3 vacant teacher positions, and 1 instructional assistant. Where are those 3 positions being cut from?
One is at White Marsh. It's, and again, this is enrollment driven, so it could be, we've looked at the projected enrollment for next year across grades. And so sometimes there's a bubble, there's a class that has a very, has an extra 15 kids in it, and you just can't spread that among 2 classes. You need that 3rd teacher, and then the following year, well, the bubble disappeared, and now it is very manageable to have 2 classes per that grade. So one is at White Marsh Elementary, one is at St. Michael's Elementary, and one is at, I'm going to say Easton High School. Okay, Easton High School. It's a social studies position, I believe. And we've been, for that one, that's been vacant for a while. The other 2 are, I believe, retirements. And so it's not a question of, anybody losing their job. It's just not filling what's called a full-time equivalent or a position.
How do you think that will affect class sizes?
So that is one of the things that we track on a regular basis. So I've been working with the schools to look at their enrollments and the actual number of teachers that they have, and it will not have a significant impact on enrollment. I'm sorry, on class size. Thank you.
The other questions I had, there were some questions already on the scaling back of tutoring, and I echo that as well. I mean, it seems to me that the focus is that we want to improve student outcomes, and so that's where when we're cutting back on teacher positions, we're cutting back on tutoring and the instructional software as well. I mean, that's something I'd want to hear a little bit more about, because I know some of that has been designed to help with situations like the COVID gap, and where there are students who can either use instructional software to move forward as they're ready, or use it to catch up. So I know that's a broad category, but that's something that I also think, if it's something that we have used to help students progress, then we'd want to take a careful look at that.
So while these are 5 positions we would suggest not to fill, we are adding 15 positions. So we would be up a net 10 positions, if you will, year over year, just keeping that in mind. And so 12,000 of that was for Lexia licenses, which is, I think, elementary. Dr. Einhorn, do you remember why we were able to cut that 12,000?
Yes, that is for licenses for training of staff in the science of reading, but the state has been offering that opportunity to our teachers, so we don't need to do as much locally. So we also had another program that the state was recommending to support us in mathematics. There have been some shifts with that, so we have determined that we're going to wait on that until we see some more results from the data.
Just of the $87,000 in cuts.
Of mathematics, it wasn't cutting from something that we have currently, it was cutting from the budget of something that we thought we might want to purchase that you're having second thoughts about.
Yes, it was a series of professional learnings, which right now, scheduling that with what's also required in the blueprint for professional learning for staff would be an undue burden to try to get our teachers all of that time. So again, we thought it most prudent to wait and see the results of that before we added that to what we're also required to do through blueprint.
Thank you.
I know also, listening to Dr. Wright, as she's come in, she's noticed that a lot of teachers and school systems are spending their own money for their staff professional development, and she feels like that shouldn't be. So she's been looking for more creative ways for either the state to pick it up, MSDE, because she feels her philosophy, teachers shouldn't have to pay for their own professional development. So she's been providing more professional development, not on the LEA's dime.
Okay, or if we're caught up, then, and I apologize, I will pause on each slide so that we're not like having to back up and you're having to remember your questions. So in special education, we have $458,000 in savings. The vast majority of that is cost savings from that non-public tuition. So what we had in our budget originally was $1.2 million. We've seen this year several students have graduated from private placement, education settings, and or aged out. So we do anticipate a lower cost next year, and that goes in hand with our reduced revenue. Also, the Midshore Special Education Consortium, who is a group of 4 counties to provide certain special ed specialist therapies. They went back and revisited their budget and came back to us with at our request, and they came back with a revised budget that saved us about $24,000. And finally, we were able to pay an invoice for the software that we use to write IEPs early. We already have actually paid that this year for $34,000. Any questions on that? Student health, we did not need the summer school nurses we were anticipating had we run summer school at multiple locations. So we will still have summer school nurses on site at Easton High School and at Easton Middle as necessary. Transportation, one of the things we typically do is pay our bus lease payments that are due next year, pay them a bit early. So we can take those out of next year's budget and use FY25 funds. Again, that dual enrollment, what we found this year was we weren't having to do those bus runs back and forth to Chesapeake College like we thought. So I think we can safely remove those from the budget. And then just a couple different things in transportation, you know, a few thousand here from supplies and here from contract services. So that netted to $488,000. Under plan operations, we have $74,000 from a bunch of different small things. We were thinking to prepay and go ahead and stock up on uniforms and prepay a few contracts for contracted services. Then under cost savings, security equipment and monitoring, remember that this budget does include the new Centegix software equipment and equipment, security equipment and monitoring. So when Mr. Schaefer negotiated a final price, the price of the equipment and the monitoring came down about $30,000. We do a comprehensive facilities review. Mr. Schaefer didn't feel that was necessary to complete that next year based on what we have going on. We're not going to be, as he mentioned earlier tonight, we're not going to be undertaking any new facilities anytime really soon, so we could skip that for this year. And the IT department has a pretty robust training program for all employees as well as their own employees, and they're going to be able to scale that back a little bit. So the $300,000 additional would be to pay for that additional cost of the Easton High School auditorium lights now that we've signed a contract. And this is a category we don't typically see in our operating budget. It's called capital outlay, and basically it's a way to put some money in our budget and transfer it over to the capital fund account. So, this is what we originally requested, 86.1 million. We've revised it down by 5,032,000 to 81 million. And this is the difference between this proposed revised budget and FY25. I will say that's probably FY25 before amendments. I didn't think about all that when I was putting this together. And then this is the difference between what we're proposing, the revised budget we're proposing, and what we originally proposed. So the majority of cuts came in, that we talked about tonight, came in the form of salaries and wages and fixed charges, which is a big part of this other charges, by eliminating some of the new positions and prepaying some items. Contracted services, that is prepaying software for the most part for next year. Not much in supplies and materials. And then the other $1 million here, savings was, big portion of that was prepaying for bus leases and prepaying for devices for students. And then adding in that $300,000 for the Easton High School auditorium lights. So that's kind of how we get there. I think that might be the last slide. I do want to show you the capital. So the capital budget, we requested two things to continue with Chapel and so we're looking all the way here at the right. I didn't do that. Maybe it's been idle for too long. So the only change to capital would be adding in $300,000 to complete that Easton High School auditorium project for next year.
Refresh my memory. Were we able to get one basketball court at Easton Elementary under the grant or no? No.
No. And I didn't think to, I mean, certainly that's something we can talk about. And again, you know, I'm somewhat optimistic that we would get access to the COVID funds. It was in the COVID funding that stopped. One of the buses was in the COVID funds. Mike, that's still not working. There we go. And of course, the health center. So if you want to put an activity court on here and fund that with fund balance, which is really our only option at this point, the board can do that. You know, if the COVID funding opens back up, then we just come in under budget.
We would get reimbursed at that point for some of these
We would,
items.
and you wouldn't even really see that on these schedules because we don't, it would show up on the schedules in the back of the budget book, which are all the restricted grants. It would be back there.
There are a few things that are sort of hanging out there like that, like the Marathon Health, like the basketball court, like I want to know more about the tutoring, whether we are in fact making a cut or we're just leveling out. And so all of those things are things that I would consider funding out of our fund balance should we need to, but I feel like that would be determined based on whether we get the COVID funding, right? And because that will cover some of what we're talking about. So we could, in theory, approve this tonight, and you would take this to county council, correct?
I don't need the board to vote on this tonight. I think we can sit on it and think about it, and we would do a vote on Wednesday night. And the reason I say that is because we really need an answer from the county council tomorrow night to make sure they do approve the transfers we need to make all the magic happen. So I think this would be appropriate for a vote on Wednesday night. But, so what I'm hearing is you need more information on tutoring. We need, and I want to talk through some options for Marathon, the health center, before we close. And you would entertain whether you'd want to add in some money for the activity court, absent the COVID funding. The thing to do would be to put it in the budget and not access it if we don't need it. If it's not in the budget, then I'd have to go to the county council and request an amended FY26 budget. I'd prefer not to do that.
I want to mention about the activities court. We talked about this months ago, that we needed it, and we actually said that we needed 2. And then I heard, I don't remember if it was from you or from Dr. DeVerick, that we actually can't fit 2. They won't permit for 2 because of the permeable surface available. So while if anybody out there was like, well, we really needed 2, we do, but there just isn't enough available space. And so we're talking about one larger one, correct?
So we're, excuse me, we're talking about one as large as we can build it for the permitting process. But I do want to just make sure the board's aware. So because of the timing of the grant funding, we had to cancel the contract for the contractor that was doing that. So right now, we would have to go back and revisit that. And so pricing may change, I guess, is really what I'm getting at, because it was a year in advance. I'm sure things will change if we have to go back and rebid that.
I wonder if there is any other source of grant funding that might be possible for that.
Funny you should ask.
Even in the community.
I just Googled that. And there appears to be, without exploring it all right this minute, but the MBA has one on here.
The MBA, yeah,
NBA.
honestly, that is not something that we looked at. I mean, we had the ESSER funding available. So that's a whole nother avenue that we'd have to go down.
Back to the health center, I just, we had some numbers tossed out at us tonight with the cost to cancel. Let's talk about that one first, just so you know it. Around 216,000. We've already paid them about 158, but it really wasn't our money, it was grant money. So it did not come out of our bank account. So we could walk away for about 216,000. Or we can stay in, and we've got $300,000 in grant funding from MABE that would fully cover the rest of the build-out cost and some of the operating cost, if you will. And then we would need to fund, a little tricky because the price is $68,000 a month, but we probably wouldn't open until September, so maybe 10 months of operating, so maybe $680,000 is what we would need for fiscal year '26 to be conservative. So we do have some reserves within the ESMIC Health Alliance. They're not on our books. They're this other organization, that we buy our insurance through and manage our insurance through. And because they have our money and have had it invested, and because certain years our experience was better than forecasted, we do have some reserves, and so we could pay for that. We could frankly pay for it fully out of reserves, but I wouldn't want to deplete our reserves. That would deplete the majority of our reserves with them, and I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. Could we spend $250,000 of our, could we fund, $250,000 out of the Health Alliance? Yes. And that's straight from Mark Lynn, who is our chief consultant. He's a senior vice president at Bolton. We could use some fund balance. And then hopefully, the last option, the COVID funding opens back up and we just use that. But that wouldn't be part of our budget. So
If
it's
we-
really up to the board. And that's a 1 year, that's the 1 year cost. I mean, there's 4 more years coming after that. Now, as you saw tonight, the idea would be somewhere around the 18 to 24 month mark. You know, they're helping us promote utilization. We should start to see we should break even, and then we should start to see some savings from what our premiums would have been in the outer years. So,
If we accept the MABE grant, which the big boss told us that he would give it to us, right? So, does that have to be repaid if the COVID funding does come through?
yeah, they would not want to give, yes, they would, correct. Yeah, they'd want to make that available for a different MABE member, sure.
Is there a mechanism, are you able to do that if you accept a grant like that? Do you have the
Sure.
ability to
Yes.
repay it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I think it would be very, very, very important to our employees as a benefit, especially the newer teachers, younger families. It's a cost benefit to them. Plus, it would make our employees healthier. It would make less, sick people. And I just think overall, it's a win for everybody. And I really think we need to do this.
Guess I just wanted to ask, when you say there's no cost in the current budget, you mean in the FY '26 budget that we just looked at, there's nothing in there for Marathon?
Supposed to be paid by a grant that the U.S. Department of Ed, the grant was open all through next year, and then it wasn't.
So the total cost of it for next year is 600?
I would
something or other?
estimate 10 months of operations would fall within the fiscal year '26 budget cycle. So I would say we would need $680,000 and change. I'll get you the exact number, but around $680,000 for 10 months of operations. Again, we have some available money. We have about $800,000 in reserves in the ESMIC Health Alliance, and this would be a cost that that would qualify for. We can only use, we've made that money into the Health Alliance. It can be used on healthcare related cost. Typically, we've used that to pay for prescriptions and things, and they've changed the way they process all that. So we have this money. Those reserves will probably not increase significantly. Good investment year, those returns may grow a little bit, but they're not going to easily be replaced. So I just want to caution the board against that, which is why I'm not comfortable saying, well, let's pay for everything out of the Health Alliance reserves, because we used to put a lot of money into that because prescriptions used to get paid through it, and they just aren't anymore. It's handled differently.
Well, and also, since we're self-insured, is that something that we use as a buffer in that sense if costs are higher in any given year than what we anticipated?
That's exactly right. Yeah,
I heard you say $250,000 is what you were comfortable with.
I would be comfortable with that.
So if you're asking me, I would do the $300,000 MAPE grant, the $250,000 from the Health Alliance reserves, and then the rest from our fund balance, which is not a huge amount from our fund balance. So it's just kind of
Right.
dipping out of each pot, which sort of balances it out, and cross our fingers and hope that the COVID funding comes through, and then deal with that when we get there.
Okay.
I haven't seen the size of the building, but is there a possibility of doing a sublease on any of the unused space?
No. It's, let me think how to say this. It's got yeah.
But I hadn't seen it, so I wasn't sure. I was
It's
just throwing it out there.
it's so nice. It's gonna be awesome. No, there's I'm gonna say there's a lab, there's 3 treatment rooms, there's a pharmacy, there's a staff restroom and a staff kitchen, there's a public restroom and a doctor's office, and then the front office. I forget how many square feet it is, maybe 1,200, something like that. So it's not big.
And there's one doctor?
It's a physician's assistant. I really pushed back a lot during the interviewing process. I'm like, why can't we use a nurse practitioner? Why are you hiring a PA? But it turns out that in Maryland, a nurse practitioner cannot dispense meds. They can prescribe meds, they cannot dispense. So that does not work for our model because our clinic is going to be dispensing meds. So we could not hire a nurse practitioner as the as the primary practitioner. So they interviewed, that's just how the licensing works in Maryland.
If we could convince the county or some other employer to jump on board with us, is there room to expand?
Yes. There was a church occupying the space next door. It's a bigger space. It's probably close to twice as much space as we have, and they've recently moved out. So yes, there is. And
Do you need a vote from us on this, or do you just kind of want to feel out where we are?
I think I just need to feel out where you are. So I think I have some good marching orders. I'll come up with the delta between the MABE grant, the $250,000 of reserves, and what we would need to put in our budget.
Before you
into
do
fund
that, does
balance.
anybody have major
My only other thing
reservations on
is,
this?
how soon could we approach the county council about joining in?
Not in time to pass this budget.
Sorry, okay, yeah.
We can, I mean, I think what makes sense is let's get it open and let's start seeing, and I think it's naturally word of mouth that like they're gonna hear that it's great, and we can approach the town of Easton, and we can, Marathon could help us. If we said we're in the market to find some partners, Marathon would help us find some partners.
Do we know whether Queen Anne's has started to see any cost savings from having this?
Per that presentation that they gave to Queen Anne's about a month ago, it said they're projecting to be at break even in 2 more months. So that would be around 18 months of operation.
Anybody else? Questions, thoughts? Does anybody have major reservations against kind of what we talked about? Yes. Yeah.
And we are taking on some additional costs and we're providing additional benefits to a wider pool of people, so that is a piece too. So that's where I have some reservations, but, balancing it all out, the potential benefit and the savings and looking at a new model. I mean, we do need a new model, that's another thing we see in our world, so those are some of my considerations and concerns.
Hopefully, the benefits outweigh the costs in the long run, and that's what the goal is, of course.
Right. Well, I do think, I agree, there's a lot of unknowns. I do think we've partnered with the best folks we could have partnered with. They
Fail.
No, that's absolutely true.
So I don't have major reservations, but I do have a lot of concerns, especially with a 5-year contract in the way University of Maryland is expanding, Luminous Health, Ohio Health are also expanding. And so I wonder about that competing factor. So yes, I do have a lot of concerns. I just don't want it to be a money dump later on down the line. But the fact that there is a underutilization clause in the contract, I think that helps ease my mind a tad bit, not knowing what that looks like though.
Well, you also have to remember, I know you're mentioning all these competing medical practices, but the employees have to pay copays at those, and they won't have to pay the copays here, especially for those employees that are on the lower wage earners. That's going to be really attractive to them.
Yeah, all understood. There's always pros and cons to all of that though, especially when you consider how many of those people may have some concerns about confidentiality. Things of that nature. Also, if I can't get all of my health care completed at this one place. You know, if I have an advanced, I can't get too specific with disease processes, but if I have an advanced disease process that I've been going to a physician for the last 15, 20 years, am I now going to switch to go to Marathon to a new practitioner?
Right. And so, I mean, the beauty, yeah, I mean, why would you if you're happy with your service and all that? But the one nice thing is we're not compelling anybody to use anything. We're going to advertise it. We're going to share the benefits. One thing Stuart talked about is in Queen Anne's, and this is only because they've been open a full year. I told him, he pitched this idea to me, and I flat out told him we were not interested. They have, just like us, they have a EPO plan, a PPO plan that they offer to their staff at, you know, certain rates. Well, in Queen Anne's, they're offering a third plan. It's the EPO plan, which is the less expensive of the two, and with a further 7% discount if they'll at least go to Marathon once and get a physical. So it kind of gets them in the door, and maybe they'll find they like it and they want to stay. And as long as they do that, then they can stay and get those cheaper rates. And that means the school district pays cheaper rates too. So he offered that option to me, and I was like, no, like I don't want to make it seem like we're forcing or compelling anyone to go. Let's roll it out. Let's see people use it. They like it. And then, we may offer that at some point in the future. I think I have what I need. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Jones. That's everything on the agenda, correct? Okay. Whew. This was a marathon. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We're going to adjourn, and I'll see you all on Wednesday.